Ed, a man that was banished from hundreds of hero groups in hundreds of different worlds, and each time for his banishment he gained a cheater skill until he became the strongest. But upon returning back, he sees his world destroyed and the one he held dear, the elf companion Tia, is dead. He again makes a deal to travel to 100 different worlds to save her. Where will this journey lead to? The strongest man with 100 different cheater skills now. A man with short hair turned to the main character named Ed and said that he might not come tomorrow. The main character looked at him questioningly and asked what was the reason. Do they have a day off tomorrow? He loudly put the mug on the table and shouted, No! Let him just not come tomorrow or ever. Ed smiled awkwardly and said he didn't understand him because he drank too much. He looked at Ed and apologized for the fact that everything was so sudden. They discussed one issue without him. This concerns him, and he must understand them. Ed opened his eyes in surprise, looked at everyone and asked if they were joking? Yes? He doesn't believe it. What about their promise to kill the demon lord together? Ed slammed his hands on the table and shouted, They're joking, right? The man with long hair answers him seriously and calmly, No, they are not joking. He asked him not to make anything bad up. He was a great guy and they were happy to have him in their group. Ed didn't understand what was happening and said thoughtfully then. The man with long hair added that they were even able to learn new things thanks to him. He slammed his finger on the table and shouted, But what's wrong with him lately? Ed began to shirk his responsibilities and does nothing in training. While everyone was trying and improving their skills, he stood on the sidelines and did absolutely nothing. The man with long hair stood up and expressed his general opinion. They thought it was temporary. The heroes believed that he would become the same, but this did not happen and their patience simply ran out. Ed bowed his head and said that he understood them. The hero interrupted him and put forward the decision that they expel him from the heroes group. There was an awkward silence in the room. Everyone was sitting with a sad look, and the hero looked gloomily at Ed. The system notified that the conditions were met, and there were 10 minutes left before the transfer. Ed smiled wickedly, stood up abruptly, raised his fist to the ceiling and shouted, Yes! It worked! The Guild of Heroes look at him in surprise and do not understand anything. The girl in the hat asks what's wrong with him? Has he gone crazy from this news? Ed said no and he was fine. He raised his hand with a pleased look and said that his wish had finally come true. Everyone looks at him silently. Ed showed the hand from which magical smoke formed and said yes before he forgets. Will they take this for last? With a confident movement of his hand, he created a portal in front of him and took out something. The girl in the hat and the hero shouted, What is this? What the hell? Ed threw the books on the table and said, Like what? Guides. She sits on him, points her finger and shouts that that's not what she's talking about. Is this spatial storage? He was hiding such a unique skill from them? Ed moved away from her pressure and said, Alas, he had to. She moved closer to him and shouted, What do you mean you had to? If he has such a great skill, then it can be used in different ways. He held the open book away from her and told them to read it. This is the information he has gathered from their battles and training. He created effective training for them based on it. The heroes looked puzzledly at the books and studied the new information received. Ed said with a happy face that since they want to become stronger, they'd better stick to his notes. The girl with short hair raised her hand guiltily, apologized and said that there was magic there that she didn't know yet. Ed quickly moved towards her and looked at the book with the question, Yeah? She looked at him questioningly, to which he told her that he wrote it because he knew that in the future, she would be able to study it. But she's right, she'll report on the details of the study later. Ed stood happy, and she looked at the book again and asked gratefully, Is it true? She thanked him. A man with short hair unfolded the map in front of everyone, pointed his finger at the drawing and shouted, demanding an explanation. This is a map of the dungeon where they go and there are hidden passages on it that they missed. Ed said contentedly, Is this poorly done? In addition, the map is convenient. He shouted at him again and asked him to explain. How could he draw a map with places they had never been? Ed mysteriously put his finger to his mouth and said that it was a secret. He's not in the hero group anymore. The man with short hair was very interested. He got angry and said, Damn it. The hero calmly turned to Ed and shouted out an apology, making a deep bow to him. In response, he shouted out his great surprise to the hero. He, remaining bowed, shouted that they did not know that he had been doing this all the time. He asked to forgive them. The girl with short hair also began to bow and shouted apologies so that he would forgive them. What he gave them is the result of his hard and persistent work. Ed jumped away from her in surprise and denied everything with his hands up. The short-haired man scratched his neck guiltily and said that he couldn't believe that not only did he work harder than him, but he also rubbished the nose of an old man like him. This act alone deserves respect. He asked for forgiveness again. Ed was very surprised by the reaction of the Heroes Guild to his gift and told them to raise their heads. This is not what he meant at all. He just wanted to give them a gift in honor of his departure, and that's all. The girl in the hat tried to win back Ed's favor and asked if he understood that with his gift he made them look like fools who did not understand anything. Or did he have some kind of plan for this? The hero, full of admiration and love in his eyes, turns to Ed, apologized and said that he would ask again. Ed's eyes widened in complete shock and he said, "Hero." He continued his proposal about whether he would like to join them and Ed interrupted him with a firm and clear answer, putting his hands in front of him, saying that he refused. The Guild of Heroes shouted their confusion at his answer, and they looked at him with contempt. The hero, lowering his head, said, "That's how it is. It's stupid to kick him out and immediately take him back. He understands it." Ed waved his hand with a smile and said that now he wants them to defeat the Demon Lord. He quickly ran away and the Guild of Heroes shouted after him to stop, at least say goodbye normally. Ed ran very quickly without looking back. People on the street looked at him, moved away, giving him way, and did not understand what was happening. He ran into the alley and almost knocked a passerby off his feet. He was so glad that it would all be over. The smile grew wider on his face. There are 10 seconds left before the transfer. He jumped from roof to roof, moving forward. 5, 4. Ed grabbed the wall with his hand, climbed up and jumped over it. 3, 2. He climbed into the tower with the bell and said, sighing, that no one would see him here. 1. A magical portal formed under him, from which a lot of light emanated. Ed stood and waited for this with glowing eyes and a wide, satisfied smile. There is a transfer to another world. The magical portal pulled him into itself, and filled the entire space while Ed fell into it and split into particles. The transfer to another world has begun. He sighed and stepped onto the clear water surface. Ed was pleased with himself, and said that he had not been here for a long time. He did a warm-up like after a hard workout, and said it had been a year or so. Next to him was a table and a round table with a magic ball, and around there were many doors to other worlds. Ed fell into a chair, collapsed, and said that this time it was hard for him, but he managed. He looked confidently at the magic ball and said that now it was his turn to keep his promise. He demanded that it bring him home. After waiting a few seconds, he realized that there was no one there. He did not count on any other outcome. He lived a quiet and peaceful life until he was called to this place. There was nothing there except one book and one door. Ed was wondering where the door led and he didn't understand what to do. God was silent. Out of idleness, he read the book, but it was terribly boring. Ed raised the book above him and read it out loud. After he enters the door one day, he will become the hero's companion. They will trust each other for a long time, but only in exile will the conditions be met, and you will return here, right there. Ed tiredly bowed his head to the book he put on the table. He said that he didn't understand anything. In addition, a door that has been opened once cannot be opened twice. Ed started to get up and said that he didn't understand anything at all. He stood up, spread his arms and shouted that he had finally traveled to 100 other worlds. It took him about 100 years. He was banished from every world. He's free. Ed seemed to be happy, but he clenched his fist from the injustice and shouted that how could he not understand? He's finally finished. So why not at least create a festive atmosphere here? Ed stood in front of the ball and pointed his finger at it. God has nothing to talk to him about. He squatted down and sighed. His only joy was that at least he didn't grow old there. Ed recalled that if in another world he went in for sports, he would be able to improve his physical shape. If he would eat a lot, he would get fat. But as soon as he will return to the white world, everything will be reset to its original values. He bowed his head, sighed, and thought that in other words, he would always be in his early 20s, even though he had lived for over 100 years as an adult in the body of a child. Ed took on a thoughtful look and said that if he thought about it, he would come home like this, since no one would recognize him anymore, and his parents had been dead for a long time. He laughed, but then memories came flooding back to him. He remembered their faces and sadness appeared. He laughed dryly at himself. He had done everything right? What else do you need? Ed asked that it fulfill its promise and send him home. Light suddenly poured out from the magic ball. Every time he was expelled from another world, the crystal ball began to glow and gave him one skill. Ed calls them the chosen skills. The thing of a lonely wanderer who traveled between worlds. Everything that the owner puts inside will be preserved even after moving to another world, a wanderer's box. By recording the places he's been on a map that only he can see in automap. Seeing the talent sleeping in people is rainbow glasses. Copy and reproduce that. That one day he saw a copy and a fake. It was because he had all these skills that he could always join the heroes group with ease, but he was kicked out every time. But why did the ball glow? Ed confidently put his hand on the ball and asked what does it mean he finally wants to give him the ability so that he returns home. The magic ball began to work. Ed didn't understand and thought they were joking. He looked at his hands and asked if they gave him a one-time ability? And what should he do with her? Throughout his entire journey here, he had never received one-time abilities. If it was so valuable, why would he use it now? Ed saw something in the distance, tried to see it by putting his hand to his head and asked what was there? Fluctuation of space. Has a door appeared? No. He ran there. All doors always appeared next to the last one, but never in the opposite direction. Is this really what he thinks? He stood next to the door and said that this is the door 000 leading to the beginning. The door to his world. Ed couldn't believe it. He was smiling, his eyes shining with happiness. Finally, it will happen. He will be able to return to where he was taken from 100 years ago. He reached for the handle on the door and thought that 100 years had passed, but did time flow in other worlds, as in his? How much time has passed in his world during these 100 years? What if no one survived there in 100 years? Ed shouted to God that he had dedicated 100 years to him. One could even say that he had stolen 100 years from him. Without explanation of reason, purpose, or even meaning. He just continued to do what he was forced to do. Ed grabbed his head and screamed in rage for God to come and talk to him at least once. Or did he want Ed to use that skill right then and there? And where is his reward for his work anyway? Will God leave him completely without anything? He stood desperately and shouted all this. God replied that he had nothing to talk to him about. A book fell behind him. He went to her and asked if it was the same book as the first time. Does God want him to read it? Ed, puzzled, began to look at the book and said that the numbers under the door number indicate the amount of time that has passed in the world since he ended up here. He thought, is this true? 00000. Does that mean he'll get to the point where he was kidnapped and locked up here? And will he return home the same day? Hope appeared in Ed's eyes. He pulled the door handle with caution, but then began to shout that it would not open. A book flew into his head and hit him hard, causing him to bend over to the floor. Ed swore at the book while opening it, but there was a key there. He raised the key so that the inscription was revealed to him in memory of the ideal Exiled. Ed was indescribably happy and flattered. He said that he had never seen such an ugly congratulation in his life. He looked carefully at the key and read that it could open any door in this world, which he had already visited once. He will be able to visit her again. That such a transition is not considered exile. By using the key again on any door in this world, he will be able to return here. And then the key will break and the door 000 will open into his world. The peace he so desired. Let's see how it all ends. Ed was stunned by this news. He didn't like all this. He asked, if he goes to another world and does not return from there, will he never be able to return here and go to his world? He tried to strain all his thoughts, but he did not understand anything, although he doubted it. But if the condition for passing was exile again, I would go crazy. He just needs to choose the right world and open the door there. This means that he chooses the easiest world, finds the door, goes back. Something now seems too easy to him. Ed was very happy about this news. He started jumping and humming something. Okay, where should he go? Ed joyfully approached every door, smiled and thought about where he should go, which world he should choose. He approached the door number 001, the first door, the first world. It was hard for him then. Ed went there without any knowledge or understanding and joined the group of heroes. Under normal circumstances, he would never have been able to join. Ed only had basic guard skills back then, but thanks to the first exile skill that was given to him as soon as he got there. Because of him, he ended up with the hero every time. Fate itself will bring him together with the hero, the inevitability of chance. But this led to another problem. He did not have any strength or ability to fight alongside the hero. Fearing that he would not be able to fulfill his duties, that he would remain there forever, he began to cling to any opportunity to help, and, as long as they would leave him. Ed negotiated for the hotel, carried things, obtained information and many other small tasks. But he doesn't know how those heroes treated him. For a year and a half they treated him as a comrade. Ed thought about it, wondering what happened next. The numbers on the door said 10 years. In 10 years they should have already defeated the Demon Lord. He thinks that there is a good and calm world there now. Ed stood in front of the door number 001 with a book on his head and made a decision. He threw the book aside and asked that since he could choose any world, why not choose the calmest one? Ed put the key to the door and thought that he was forced to go there the first time. When he remembers this, he is horrified. If someone asks him if he liked it there, he will, of course, receive a negative answer. He has a lot of painful memories there, but it was also fun at times. Ed opened the door, sighed and carefully began to enter the first world, shielding himself from the light with his hand. Brings back memories. Another world from which it all began. Ed entered this world. He stood in an empty field, on thick grass, in the same place as the first time. In a hurry, he took out the key. He almost forgot about it, and said that it would be bad if he lost it. Now that he's here again, he's starting to remember everything. Ed walked around and saw a city in the distance. He was happy about this and said that the Demon Lord should definitely be defeated and there should be no strong monsters here. But he immediately wondered if there was a catch. A mountain grew behind him, and a monster emerged from it. Ed turned around quickly and cautiously. He knew it. He was thrown into the sky by a sharp and strong wave. When he landed on the ground, he had to make an effort not to fall. Ed asked the monster why the hell he was so big? And what is he doing there? The monster let out a roar in his direction. Ed summoned a magical portal, the Wanderer's box, and said okay, he'll practice on it. He took out a sword from the portal, looked at it, and said that he could use the skill of the Exiled here, which he did not yet know then. He looked thoughtfully and asked then, what about? Like this? The monster opened its mouth and quickly flew towards him, and he stood firmly in place with a smile of excitement. Stone body. The monster sank its fangs into Ed's shoulders, but he stood still like a stone. He looked at the monster with a grin, and said that he was not that strong if he couldn't bite through his body. The monster made sounds of anger and indignation, his eyes bulging. Ed looked at him without any fear and asked what he would do next. The monster, with a sharp and frightening movement, created magical runes, from which something began to come out, like smoke or foam. And Ed just got disappointed and asked, is it magic? Let him try. The magical attack flew straight at Ed, but he remained unharmed and only winked at the monster, saying that he was immune to magical and physical attacks soaked from magic. Ed decided not to delay for too long and jumped on the monster with his steel sword and said that it was time to finish. He cut it into 2 even halves with one confident and strong attack. Ed landed on his knees after the attack, stood up and became so interested. He asked if he could stay here longer? Ed left that place and said that looking at all these places, nostalgia was creeping through him. Usually, he was obliged to join the hero's squad and work in pairs with him, but now he doesn't need anything and he's finally on his own. Moreover, the Wanderer's treasure is still full of gold. Ed walked with a waddle, throwing his hands behind his head and thought that now he would even heal well. He thoughtfully asked if he could buy armor like the heroes. I wonder if they still sell hero pies here? Ed took them and ate them with a satisfied face. He thought with a grin that a strange picture was emerging in his head, but that didn't stop him one bit. Something distracted him from eating the pies. He didn't understand what it was. Ed's eyes widened and he ran sharply. It's impossible. They must be joking? What's going on here? He ran in complete confusion to the place where he did not like what he saw. Ed saw the ruins and asked, is the city destroyed? There is almost nothing left of the city, but why? Were they attacked by monsters? But how? The Demon Lord should have been killed by now. Is it really a war between people? Ed walked through the destroyed city and did not understand anything. Once the Demon Lord is gone, it is obvious that people will start fighting among themselves. He doesn't understand anything, but how could everything be destroyed in 10 years? Skeletons of people lay in the ruins. He took a piece of wood and squeezed it. Everything is too suspicious. What happened here? An old man was sitting in the distance. He turned to Ed and asked what he forgot here. There's nothing left here anymore. Ed made a questioning sound and turned in his direction. The old man asked if he had received false information that it was safe here. The old man threw him a small bag and shouted for Ed to be more careful next time. Ed thanked him and thought he wasn't here to dig through the rubble. He asked him why the city was destroyed. Stark kept rummaging through the ruins, looking at something and asking what he was talking about. The city has been destroyed for about 2 years now. Ed's eyes widened and he asked what? The old man continued the story that this was all the army of the Demon Lord. They wiped this city off the face of the earth. Ed didn't believe it, like the Demon Lord's army? 2 years ago? Yes, that's right, the old man has gone crazy. Wasn't the Demon Lord supposed to be destroyed? The old man poked at the trinket and calmly said that why would this be if an army of demons had been ravaging his world for a long time, and there was no end to them. He turned to Ed. Why doesn't he even know this? Where did he even come from? Ed was confused. He raised his hand and asked, what does it mean that this world has been devastated for a long time? What? What about the hero? Where did the hero go? The old man asked him again, didn't you understand, hero? Ed told him, yes, hero. Alexis. He was the prince of this country 10 years ago, and was one step away from killing the Demon Lord. Where is Alexis? The old man reminisced and said that he died at the hands of demons 5 years ago. Ed started laughing hysterically and raving that he was a hero. Dead? Yes, this is impossible. He remembered the monster who was the first to meet on his way in this world and thought that could he be killed by creatures similar to that huge monster? The old man decided to tell Ed that he didn't think so. This city is proof of that. If the hero were alive, they would not be in such a deplorable situation. Ed shouted, what? He pulled the old man by the shoulders and continued, what's wrong with him? What about his comrades? The old man shouted back that how could he know, maybe they died together. He had never heard of anyone surviving. The world is cruel. There's nothing you can do about it. Their offensive failed, such was fate. Ed was silent. He just began to lose his balance and stepped back. He fell on the ruins and sat with his head down. The old man said that they were ordinary people, they couldn't do anything about it, and that it didn't matter, a hero, a prince, a commoner, everyone was equal before death. He started to leave and said that Ed was advising him to also leave here before it was too late. Ed covered his face with his hand and asked himself, is he dead? Why? How? What happened after he was expelled? Did they really lose to the Demon Lord? And now dead? Dead? Are they all dead? Alexis, Gonzo, Tia. Is it all because of him? Or is the reason for something else? Tears flowed from Ed's eyes. He refused to believe it, even though he was an extra burden, but he tried to act in such a way that he would be less useful in the first place. He doesn't believe in their death. Ed imagined Alexis, Gonzo and Tia in demonic form. There was nothing left of them. He was sad for them with his eyes closed. Is the end of this world now a foregone conclusion and humanity destined to perish? Ed put his hand in front of him and told his exile skill to appear. Runes appeared around Ed's hand, and above the hand there were 2 rings rotating among themselves an Akashic compass. He told him to find him the place where the hero Alexis died. The Akashic compass showed him the place. Ed asked, is he really dead? The compass made a distinct sound, a beep. Ed asked if the Demon Lord's castle was there. Gonzo. Show me where he died. The compass made the sound again without changing its location. He thought that in the same place, that means they died fighting bravely together. Ed became more and more withdrawn into himself and said, what should he do now? Maybe find them a good place and make a grave? Tia. Tia. Where did Lunarisha die? The compass made a sound, a beep, but the window was empty, not found. Ed looked at the compass in shock, but there was no place for Tia's death in it. He asked the question, what? He shouted at the compass, Tia. Where is Lunarisha now? The compass spun and showed him a tree house. Ed immediately knew where it was. The compass made a sound. Ed said exile skill. His eyes lit up. He was ready for anything. He got ready and used the skill Hermes dash. He rushed through the ruins so quickly that all that was left of him was a loud sound. Ed ran towards his goal with confident and quick movements. Tia. He overcame all the obstacles along the way, and only Tia was in front of his eyes. He exclaimed that she was alive. Ed flew over the lake with swans and shouted, Tia. Exile skill. Tia is in front of his eyes. A countdown timer appeared above him, 59:59. He flew through the swans, pushing them out of the way, and used the skill Ghost Acceleration. The timer showed 51:17. He flies over the top of the mountain. 35:29. He quickly crossed the water. 17:28. The demon made a terrifying sound. Many terrible demons with wings and tails flew past the stone towers. Ed quickly flew towards his goal, but the timer above his head was already showing and beeping loudly midnight. The effect will end now. He had just reached the flying demons. They were coming at them from behind. Ed flew right under the demons, and they clearly noticed him. Someone was shouting to be listened to, brothers. Now they will destroy another human city. Their victory is near. The commander stood at the top, and below, loyal warriors demons listened to him. He shouted for them to keep moving forward. They killed everyone who got in their way. The demons let out an agreeing and terrifying roar. The commander saw something approaching in the distance. Behind the demons, a sound began to be made and the ground began to tremble. Ed was approaching. He shouted with great hatred towards all the demons that he would kill them. Ed flew through the crowd and knocked all the demons standing there off their feet. He created a deadly tornado. The commander shouted that he didn't understand anything. Ed, looking tired but confident, did his job. He found himself in the forest and tried to catch his breath from such a long run. Ed hunched over to catch his breath, looked at the compass, and then just stood there again, catching his breath. He was all wet with sweat. As soon as Ed came to his senses, he straightened up and asked why he had come running there. He remembered something, hesitated, started patting his pockets and shouting, he probably should have brought her a gift or something like that. Ed created a magical portal, stuck his hand into it, and diligently began to look for at least something that could suit him. He shouted with concern that he must find something for her to praise him. And he thought, this is exactly what he needs, orange fruit. If he remembers correctly, she loves sweet fruits, so that should be a great fit. Ed picked up a whole basket of these sweet fruits for her, and smiled because he would not come empty-handed. He stood in front of the door to the house and scratched the back of his head. What if for her he is nothing more than another mediocrity that they kicked out of the squad of heroes? And then he comes to her home, and will she be happy with him? Ed gathered his thoughts and hesitantly knocked on her door. There were so many doubts in his head, but he decided, to hell with him, if he doesn't try, he won't know. He took a deep breath and exhaled. So, Ed quickly and confidently began knocking on the door, loudly apologizing and shouting, "Is anyone home? Is there really no one at home?" Ed began to doubt that there was someone in the house and asked in a calm voice if there was someone in the house, as if he had lost hope. He accidentally pushed the door and froze. Ed closed his eyes and shouted that everything was wrong, that the door was originally open, he didn't want to enter without permission. Tia asked, "What is there?" She got up from her bed and looked towards the exit, and then turned to the guest. "Is he really Ed?" She rolled her eyes at him, and couldn't believe it. Her golden hair and emerald eyes. Ed was very worried. He greeted her, and said that it was him. Tia jumped from her bed straight onto Ed. Exactly the same as 100 years ago. She hugged him tightly and mentioned his name many times. It was clear that she was happy about this meeting. He was a little shocked by this, but she kept hugging him and saying his name. Ed shouted for her to stop with fear in her eyes. She was too close. Well, let her stop. She's too close. Don't let him snuggle. Tia was so happy to meet her. Her tears flowed. She rubbed his cheeks. Tia began to cry. She rubbed his cheeks and thought that he was really Ed. "I thought I would never see him again." Ed told her to slow down and asked her, "What do you mean, never see her again?" She asked what he was talking about. When he left the hero group, no matter who you ask, no one ever saw him. So she thought. Ed held her in his arms. He apologized to her and said that he didn't want her to worry. He was expelled from the heroes group long ago. He changed his name and worked in another country. Tia asked if it was true. That's how it is. Ed thought that in fact, 10 minutes after being eliminated, he was thrown into the white world. The girl smiled and said that in any case, she was glad that he was alive. Like a mountain of shoulders. The girl said that she thought she would fall soon. It's better to get up. Ed said he was the one who was going to fall. He sat her down on a chair and told her to sit down. Tia asked, "Oh, what is this?" Wow, her favorite fruit. There are so many more. Ed said he brought her a small present. The girl said she was flattered, but there was no bathroom here. Ed clarified, "Here, the bathroom? And why is this now?" She said that if he didn't know, these fruits are thrown into hot water, washed with them and eaten, then the skin becomes very soft. He asked, "What's the problem with just eating them?" The girl looked at him in bewilderment. He said he wasn't kidding. They are already very tasty. He started taking out fruits and said that he would peel some for her. She has to believe, they are already very tasty. Tia asked, "Really?" Then turning to him she asked why his clothes were so torn. Ed told her to score. He just traveled a lot around the world to see one beautiful sweet fly. She said that's what it means and laughed. Ed asked what kind of malicious laugh. The girl did not answer, and then said that then she would go change clothes. He replied, "Okay." He thought that nevertheless she was in pajamas. Looking out from the top floor, the girl asked Ed if he wanted to change clothes together. He shouted, denied. He was never popular with girls. But Tia is always not shy. She cuddles up to him, brings her face close, he can even feel her breath on him. He cut the fruit and looked around and thought that this was her house. He looked in different directions, and then Tia came down. She apologized for keeping her waiting. Ed jumped in surprise and shouted that it wasn't what she thought. The girl changed clothes and asked him how he liked it. Doesn't she look weird? And she laughed awkwardly. Ed looked at her awkwardly and thought, why? Why did she dress like she did before? No. He doesn't believe it. Why was she dressed up like that? Because of the situation in the world? Many people have died and then he suddenly comes to her house. Isn't this the reason to seduce him, since there is not much choice? The girl called him. He nervously shouted, what? What? Tia held out her hand and told him to take off his clothes. She took out a sewing kit and asked if they were definitely not sour. This is arena fruit, after all. He said it was true. Why can she trust him? She asked if he promises that they are delicious. While sewing up the man's clothes, she looked at him and told him to feed her. Ed was confused and shouted, what else? Eat it yourself. She said that her hands were now busy sewing his clothes. She thought that he was feeding her. He took a piece of fruit and put it in the girl's mouth. She screamed that it was sour. He's a liar. Ed said he couldn't be more wrong. He must try. After eating a piece, his face tightened. He told her to look, they are sweet. The girl covered herself with only clothes. He told her to stop mocking him. Opening one eye, she said that she was not kidding. Or is she no longer allowed to play around and be nostalgic for the old days? Although she looks younger, Tia is an elf. And she is over 100 years old. From her point of view, it really looks like she is playing with a small child, so he has long stopped getting angry or reacting in any way to her jokes and antics. Only she will never understand this. He said she hasn't changed a bit. As expected from the heroes group members. Then Ed suddenly became confused and shouted, no. She's not like that. He doesn't hold a grudge against her. He asks for anything, just so she doesn't beat him. She just said about the old days, so he remembered. He apologized to her. Tia said she was sorry. Ed bowed his head and shouted that it was his fault and apologized to her again. He said he was sorry. Tia said it was her fault. Didn't he come here to get even with her? Ed asked, is it her fault? What is she talking about? She said that she was the only one who survived from the group of heroes. Ed told her to tell him what happened. Continuing her sewing, she said that as soon as he left, they tried to find someone to take his place. But no one came. See, he left when they were almost at the border with the Demon Lord's army. The only reason people wanted to join them was for their own achievements, so that they could later brag that they fought in the heroes group. But she thinks that warriors will want to carry luggage and do everything they want, but not fight? As a result, no one stayed with them until the end. They hired 6 people, but all of them later left them. After them, they didn't look for anyone else. Even so, they only lasted for 3 months. Ed asked what? Okay, he, the idiot, made a mistake, but they are professionals. The girl said that they were only engaged in carrying luggage. And he, Ed, did not only this, but also helped them in everything. I did laundry, set up camp, monitored their health, and also cooked for them. Ed thought about what happens if he hadn't been weak then, he wouldn't have been thrown out. Okay, he'll pretend he didn't hear anything. The girl said that they were wrong, his work is really difficult. Even Alexis realized this when he hired others. And then, her job is just to carry luggage all the time and that's it. If this is all he needs, then he should finally hire a professional in this matter. Hearing this, Alexis directly told him to leave. Ed thought that if he used it as a standard, then he sympathizes with him. He said that this meant that none of them even rested properly, as he understood. Tia looked at the clothes and said that it was. And only then did they realize that they shouldn't have expelled him. After that incident, they were not going to hire anyone. Until one person came to them himself. He was wearing a mask and asked if they needed a luggage carrier? She said he would help and even promised to be a guide. Alexis immediately agreed to his proposal. They continued their journey in this composition, and that man with them. Soon, they approached the border of the Demon Lord's land. And as soon as they stepped over it, they were horrified. Although they were ready for this, that man ran away. With all their equipment, healing potions and artifacts. He disappeared into blue light. Ed shouted stop. It was a teleportation crystal? She said that it was so, and they prepared him in case of an emergency retreat. She asked, he won't use it, will he? Won't he run away from the battlefield? So they shouted to that man, but... She squeezed her hand and asked why? Why? Why did he run away? Why did you betray them? Ed shouted, what does that mean he was going to do this from the start? And join them to lure them into a trap and escape? The girl replied that she did not know, but they had no choice but to fight. But the demons surrounded them from behind. They were surrounded. In case the first one was destroyed or lost, they hid another crystal in Alexis's armor. But it was intended only for him. After all, he is the last hope of humanity. Tia yelled at Alexis to leave. A hero is a man chosen by the gods and the prince of their country. The man apologized to her. Tia said that they must protect him at all costs. Alexis shouted at Tia to leave them and leave on her own. What kind of hero would he be if he left the battlefield? He then gave the crystal to Tia and destroyed it. He decided to be a hero until the very end. Even if his choice put all of humanity at risk. But Alexis, he should have survived. Tears flowed from the girl's eyes. She was screaming, not her. The details of the death of the hero's team have been revealed. Ed asked the girl, has she calmed down? She said yes and apologized to him, and then thanked him. She continued her story and said that she was then transported to a secret room in Notland Castle. The men around her asked what happened to the prince. Why is she here? Only Mr. Alexis can be saved this way. The king asked her to say what happened to his son. She said she told them the same story as Ed. The king told her to hide in the wilderness, and that they would inform everyone that the hero's team was killed on the borders. Ed yelled, what? He thought that all this was bad, but sometimes he also had no choice. He weighed the future of the world and the lives of his comrades and chose the latter. It's very much like him, but as a hero he did the wrong thing. But he always thought about his comrades first, so his choice was obvious. Ed said the king respected his son's final decision. Tia said that because of his request, she was unable to participate in the next 3 trips to the demon world. Ed asked, hiking? Tia looked at him and asked if he didn't know anything, then how far away did he live? Ed laughed awkwardly. The allied countries sent troops to the demon lands 3 times to save Alexis, but even the whole army could not advance far. There was no hero, and with him there was no hope of saving humanity, and therefore they lost. Then Tia asked, by the way, now that I think about it, her location is a mystery. How did he find her? Ed scratched the back of his head and said that he seemed to have an item that allows him to search for people wherever they are. So he became interested in where they were and what they were doing. But even with his help, not Alexis, not Gonzo, he didn't find it. Tia said, okay, that means they are. Ed didn't let her finish and apologized to her. Tia thanked him for everything. At least she was able to come to her senses. After all, it is impossible to survive against the entire army of the Demon Lord. Ed called Tia. She picked up the fabric she was sewing. Flowers were on the seam. She asked, how is he? Nice, right? Ed looked at the completed work with embarrassment and said, yeah, very much. Suddenly everything shook. He turned around and asked, what? Where are the vibrations coming from? Outside? He ran towards the sound. Tia tried to stop him. In front of Ed stood a big scary dragon. He looked at it and asked what the lesser dragon forgot here. Lost or deliberately descended from the mountain? He said it was funny. Tia asked him why he went outside. He looked at her confused and asked, what do you mean why? He told her to go back to the house. Tia told him not to worry, she would sort it out. The dragon raised its head, and then suddenly lowered it and released powerful fire from its mouth. Ed said he didn't care how strong he was. It's a breeze for him. Suddenly Tia grabbed him by the collar. Ed asked what? She knocked him to the floor. And she stood in front of him creating some kind of barrier. He asked, water wall? Tia said she won't let anyone die again. She will protect him. The silver moon blade that controls the wind should turn the moon green. The feathers of the 6-winged spirits that everyone can see must become the firmament that defeats her enemies. They must come together and defeat her enemies. She, Lunarisha, commands. Triangular flow. She released powerful energy and cut the dragon into pieces. Ed was absolutely delighted with what he saw. He shouted, wow! With one hit? Great, Tia! How delicately she did everything. Not only its scales, but its hands are cut perfectly evenly. How much stronger has she become since their last meeting? Tia was embarrassed by such statements and stood with her head bowed. What a young lady she is! She turned to Ed. He asks him to leave. Tia was breathing heavily and sweat was dripping from her. He started asking what happened to her. Her hands were shaking, her breathing was heavy. But now she asked him to leave? She looked him in the eyes and said that she wanted to show off to him, but it seemed like she was overdoing it. She's fine. Ed was worried about her and said that she was clearly not feeling well. She just denied it. She just doesn't remember the last time she fought. You see, she even dressed up for him. Does he like it? He was shocked by her action. Tia called him back into the house. She was nervous again, bad luck. She climbed behind the curtain and asked him not to peek. Ed thought, okay, she was in the hero group, she should definitely be fine. In his head are the words that she said after the fight when she asked him to leave. What does it mean to leave? He went back to the defeated dragon and said that first he needed to deal with this, and only then would he think. Should he try putting it in his bag? Although no, I don't think he'll fit in like that. Or should I first chop it into pieces and then try to stuff it in? While he was sitting thinking about the dragon, a strange sound was heard from the house. Tia? Ed came back into the house and exclaimed, Tia! Where are you? Tia? He warned her that he was coming towards her. She? Tia? When he got up and went behind the curtains, Tia was lying on the floor unconscious. He screamed and asked what happened to her. Why is she lying down? Tia turned a little towards him and tried to say his name, but she was completely exhausted. He touched her shoulder, she was shaking all over. Ed looked at her dumbfounded and didn't understand what it was. Half of her body was covered with something, and she seemed to be writhing in pain and powerlessness. Ed realized that her body was starting to turn black from the heart and further down the body, reaching the neck, and then further along the arms. He thought what was happening to her. It looked like dead skin. Tia barely uttered the word clothes. Ed exclaimed, clothes? Where are her clothes? Not far from her lay a piece of fabric resembling her robe. Sunlight appeared in the wooden house. It was calm, quiet and empty. Ed and Tia were in her bedroom. He asked her if she was feeling better. She responded positively that she was much better. She thanked him. Tia covered herself with a blanket guiltily and told him not to think. She was not trying to hide anything from him. Ed looked at her in surprise, and she continued that when she fought with Alexis and the others, she used the secret elven techniques so that everyone could survive. This power allows you to dramatically increase the power of magic by shifting magic with life. Ed looked at her in shock and said, magic with life? This means that the payment for such tricks is her life. Ed was outraged. He shouted, what does her life mean? Wait, but just recently she was feeling good. What's happened? Why is she so harsh? His eyes were filled with fear. Tia hid almost her entire face under the blanket, as if defending herself from his words. Ed shouted that why did the lower dragon almost waste her life? She said that yes, she didn't want him to be killed, that's why she overdid it a little. He moved closer to her face and stared intently. Did she think they would kill him? His? Why her? That's right, he hasn't told her anything yet. While he was thinking, she rose from the bed, not understanding anything. Tia pressed her fist to her chest and said that she didn't have much life left for such magic, so those clothes were the only thing that somehow helped her stay alive. With her help, she can take magic from the trees around her. And this helps her. If she takes it off and uses magic, her life will not be enough and she will die. Ed pulled her by the shoulders and shouted, why did she even take it off then? She began to apologize to him. She was very happy to see him and only wanted to repeat the peaceful days they once had. But it looks like she screwed up again. Tia took off her clothes and used forbidden magic. That magical beast must have noticed her then, so. Ed tilted his head and said, which means the dragon flew here. He thought clearly, this is all his fault, how useless he is. Is this really the retribution for his self-confidence in her favor? Tia looked at him questioningly and asked what was wrong. Ed thought that he just wanted to make sure she was safe. Why did he even decide to run away then? And that was all. Tia looked at him with respect and love. She asked him not to make such a face. She took his head in her hand, placed her forehead against his and said that she may have lived a rather short life by elven standards, but she lived for the sake of others and had no regrets. She met wonderful friends and saw him again, she didn't need more. Ed took her hand and shouted at her not to say that again. He didn't come here to see her die. There was a sound behind the house, and Ed was shocked by the sound. He exhaled and realized that one of the monsters had come again. Tia selflessly and sadly told him to leave here, she really asks. Ed clearly refused her. She screamed, "No, Ed. Ed." He calmly told her that he might look the same, but that was far from the case. Ed thought he would tell her the truth. His appearance and body have not changed a bit since the last time we met. After all, he was returning again along the timeline, to the very moment when he came to that white world. Ed bowed his head and said that after he left the group, he worked hard on himself and gained a lot of experience. Over the course of 100 years, he managed to travel to 100 worlds. He met a lot of people and trained with them. He said he's been through a lot, and she can't even imagine. Ed thought that he was no longer the same person he used to be. He turned to her again with a serious face and said how much stronger he had become, that's why. Now it's his turn to protect her. Tia didn't understand what was happening. She started screaming that no, she was asking him to leave here as quickly as possible. He replied that she should not worry, he would never leave her again. He promises? Ed walked towards the exit, leaving her in bed. Tia tried to get up, she crawled towards him and screamed for him to stop. Even in this situation, Tia tried to protect him. She was shaking from powerlessness and crawling on all fours towards the exit. As for him, all he can do for her is save her from countless magical beasts. Ed left the house and began to fight all living creatures with the help of his heroic sword. He chopped off one head after another. He won't be able to resurrect the hero and the others, he won't be able to bring her life back. He knows this, he knows, but still. Tia went down the stairs and slowly moved towards the exit. A huge stone monster stood in front of Ed. He said that he would not allow any of his friends to die again. Tia crawled to the table and tried to catch her breath. Ed bloodthirstily, with passion in his eyes, killed all his enemies along the way. Even the greatest of miracles applies only to those living today. Peaceful days can no longer be returned. He exclaimed, "Creation, sword of blood!" With even greater speed and dexterity, he dealt with a bunch of enemies with his bloody sword. Ed cut down every living thing. Tia crawled outside and watched what was happening with a shocked look. There were thousands of cut-up creatures of various sizes around the house. He asked, "Is it a miracle?" "Screw him. It's actually very valuable, so why would he use it now?" Ed said that if he is not mistaken, he does have that skill. Throughout his entire journey, he had never received one-time abilities. What if he uses it here? Will he be able to start over? Please live a good and peaceful life. Ed exclaimed that he was done. Tia looked at him in surprise. He asked if she now believed that he could protect her. She asked him back, when did he become so strong? Ed said that after his expulsion he trained a lot. He quickly and lightly approached her. She turned to him. And he carefully prepared to listen. Tia asked if he could carry her to the border of the demon's domain. Ed is shocked. She got nervous, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and continued. Can he do it? If not, then it's okay. He asked her not to worry, patted her on the head and said that he would do anything for her. That's the way she believes him. Hope flared up in Tia's eye and she thanked him with joy in her voice. He wasn't even going to ask what she left there. After all, he already understood her desire. Ed wrapped her in a soft robe, built a chair on which he sat her and tied her to his back. He asked if she was in pain. He warned that it might shake a little and that she should hang in there. I asked her to tell me if something was wrong. Tia agreed. All he wanted then was to fulfill her wish. They set out on a journey, passing through terrible places with killed creatures and frightening sounds. When they got there, Ed asked if they were there. Tia confirmed that this was the right place and asked to be placed. Tia said that Alexis gave her a teleportation crystal here. She said she didn't think she could come back here again. She thanked him with all her heart. She turned to her comrades and said that Ed had brought her here. Alexis, are Gonzo seeing this? Tia sat down near the stone and told them that he had become much stronger, that he could single-handedly through the demon lands. She said with a laugh that she thought he was even stronger than Alexis. Tia asked if he remembered how they banished him. Ed remembered that story and sadly and awkwardly said that he remembered. She said that she was the only one who thought about him all the time. She didn't want him to die, but he was weak compared to everyone else. Ed sat down next to her and said he knew it. They looked at the sky as if dreaming. Tia said she never thought he would become so strong. Could they all look at the sky like this together now? If they didn't expel him then? And see a world without demons in it? Ed looked at her and said he didn't think so. She turned to him, lay down on his shoulder, and thanked him for bringing her here. How she would like to fulfill your promise too. Ed told her not to worry, his wish would soon come true. Tia asked what is his wish? He said that he had not been home for a very long time. She agreed with him. He continued that she could go to his house, his mother would be glad to see her again. Tia laughed and asked if it was true. Ed said that of course, but first they would need to buy a couple of souvenirs. For example, a bow for father and a dress for mother. Tia said she thought she would like pink. He laughed and continued that if he returned home with money, then someone would definitely want to take it away. Then he will have to ask Tia for help. She didn't mind it. And then Ed remembered something, said that with his skills as an exile, he could fix everything. He can destroy the demon lord and ask for a noble title for it. Or even become the ruler of a kingdom, that's all. Tia listened to him, smiled and closed her eyes. The flower fell lifelessly from Tia's hand. Ed bowed his head in mourning, his soul was both empty and torn at the same time. He said that this is really God's plan? Once upon a time, he believed that life would get better and the world would sparkle with bright colors for him again, but this did not happen. Ed clenched his fist and said that he had worked hard for the last 100 years. For what? For it all to end like this? Why was he given all these skills then? He raised his fist to the sky and said that he was glad for any good outcome, but it never happened. Ed started to raise his voice and at the end he screamed. And because he will fix everything. And even if for this I have to go through his entire path again. He used the exile skill. Infinity. A magical pillar was created around him, stretching far into space. Ed opened his eyes and muttered the question, where is he? Table, chair, is this a room? And why is she all white? Is he sleeping? He was lying on the floor and suddenly came to his senses. He screamed with all his might. What? Ed stood up and started looking around and waving his arms. He continued to shout that this is not a dream. Where the hell is he? How did he end up here? What? Was he kidnapped while he was sleeping? Or is he dead? No. What the hell? He put his hand to his face and said okay, he just needs to calm down and think it over. He was just walking around and killing parasitic moles, nothing unusual so far. Then he had lunch and went into the forest to set up camp for the night. It will work out. Ed reminisced, puzzled, and sweat appeared on his face. He said nothing was working out. Door? For what? A book fell on the table behind him with a loud sound. He was very scared and screamed. What? Was the book here the whole time? He thought about it and asked what is this white book? Ed read the book and closed it with a smile. He asked how? So he was taken from his world and brought here. And if he wants to return back, then he needs to join the heroes squad in 100 worlds, train him and make sure that he is expelled. Clearly. Ed put the book on the table and said that these are quite funny conditions, but now everything is clear to him. He looked sharply at the ceiling and shouted that he didn't want this. Why was he called here? What did he do? Why should he help the heroes? He doesn't want to be associated with them anymore. A strange sound was made, and he was distracted from his thoughts and screams. In front of him stood a magical stone from which this sound came. Ed didn't understand anything and asked, is it a ball? The book said that touching him would give him special powers. The ball shone very brightly and could blind anyone. And he just wants to go home. Ed closed his eyes and shouted, to hell. To hell with it. He accepts the terms. He just needs to touch, right? Ed reached out to the magic ball and placed his hand on it. Sparks began to fly from the ball, it shone even brighter and made another loud sound. Ed asked what? What is this? Does it project a skill directly into his head so that he is sure to meet a hero? Because of this, now at least there will be no problems with the hero. Before his eyes there were 3 people, the hero and his team, but without faces, only outlines. Ed didn't understand anything. What else is this? He doesn't understand anything. His eyes bulged, lightning struck his forehead and he knocked it upward from the blow. A large amount of information pops up right in his head. Ed writhed in pain and asked if these were his memories? Everything that happened to him? He experienced all these moments. His head hurt a lot. He sees himself performing a task in more than one world. Just don't tell him that 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, he begins to remember. His head was pounding. It didn't stop. Ed screamed in pain that he had had enough. Don't give up. This is the only way he can fix everything. All his memories come back to him. He experienced them in an instant. He pressed himself to the floor, clutching his head. He was covered in sweat. Tia was in front of his eyes. She told him to say what his desire was. Ed tried to catch his breath. His wish? He tried to get to his feet and said it was funny. He had outsmarted himself. Using the infinity skill, he returned to the past. He didn't think such skills existed. Considering all this skill could fool even God himself. Second blessing. He now has all the memories and skills that he collected sometime in the future. With their help, he will need to go through 100 worlds again. Ed was all glowing and said that skill was gone. He might not have a second chance to return. But that's enough for him. He grabbed his shoulder and thought that he could handle it. He will become even stronger. Ed stood in front of door 001 and said that he had already walked this path once. He won't let the shitty ending where Tia and the others die anymore. Ed opens the door and, flying into the magical light, says that he will bring me to his home. And everyone will meet a happy ending. And now, let's start all over again. A man with long hair was cutting up meat for consumption. A man with short hair stood over him and shouted, "Why can't he accept it? He's strong enough to fight." He replied that he could hear him perfectly well, so he asked him to be quieter. The man with long hair calmly said that about him now they don't need a strong person like him. His task is only to carry luggage. Does he understand this? The crowd in that establishment whispered to everyone to watch. Is there a hero there? And they really are. I wonder if that person came to him to join him? It seems that he is already the third. Should he also try his luck? A girl in the crowd called her friend names. Stupid. There's no way they'll take her into the group. Besides, if she is now thinking of seducing the hero, then it is better for her to forget. The girl asked her in response, why does she reveal her cards in front of everyone? The man with long hair calmly ate while he listened to all this. He turned sharply towards those girls. They spoke to each other. Hey, the hero is looking at her. And exactly for her? Maybe to another one? The man with long hair said now. Ed found himself right in front of the hero. He greeted him and asked if he needed a squire. Would he mind if he still fought in between? The man with long hair turned sharply on him and asked who else this was. And when did he manage to arrive? The crowd walked around thinking and asking questions. Who is he? It's clearly not easy for the hero. This is the fourth one today. He's never been seen here before. Ed was glad that I could interest him. He told the hero that he was pleased to meet him. He is Ed, a traveling adventurer. On his first playthrough, he clung to the hero and begged him to let him join him. And then Tia helped him a lot. She stood up for him. But now it seems like a very bad idea to him. After all, the squire cannot even dictate where the hero should go. Alexis asked interestedly, what does Ed mean to say that he can fight along with the trunk? A serious statement. Ed replied that he could. If he doesn't believe him, they can try. On the other hand, completely ignoring the events of the first round is a big risk. So, you just need to agree on double work. Ed continued that he could even defeat him with this thing in his hand. He held the hero's dinner plate. Ed thought that to do this he had to force Alexis to accept him. Alexis took the fork and hit it hard on the table. It was so hard that the table underneath him collapsed. A loud sound was heard and a wave of strong wind passed through the room. Everyone was horrified. Alexis agreed and continued that if he doesn't drop, he's accepted. They became excited about the battle. Ed commanded that they could begin then. The tavern owner saw the ruins and was outraged at what they had done to his tavern. Ed said that the hero can start first. Let him say when he is ready. Alexis began the battle. Ed was surprised by the unexpected start, but reacted and abruptly pulled out his silver sword. He stopped Alexis's fork with his sword. Ed said it was very close. He replied that his attempts were amazing, that he was a funny guy. Just let him finish, he doesn't want the food to get cold. Ed happily said that he was giving up or he would have to order new food. Alexis made blow after blow, but his opponent held on well. His hand with the plate did not waver. Hero. It is logical that the easiest way to test it is in personal combat. That's his job. While fighting, they moved along the street. Ed thought that the hero was strong, and he must prove his strength to everyone. After all, only he can defeat the Demon Lord. Hope for all humanity. If he wants to join the hero's party as a squire and adventurer, then he needs to prove his strength. And this way it will be more obvious to everyone, even if he himself is against it, his allies will be obliged to accept him. Alexis's fork was worn down to the base of the handle from the fight, and smoke came out of it. They stood on neighboring roofs, opposite each other. Ed asked, well, what is he going to do? His food is getting cold. Ed thought that he not only wanted to be a squire, that he would carry luggage, but also their faithful comrade. Spinning the plate on his index finger, he asked Alexis if it was time for the hero to fight at full strength. The hero said that he was right. We need to finish. His eyes lit up and he began to draw his sword. The blows were struck and repelled again and again. Alexis said he was surprised. He was able to block the blows of his sword. How did he do it? Ed replied that the secret is simple: he does not fight at full strength. The hero said, that's how it is. He struck again. Ed thought that he really was a hero after all. His skills were insanely strong. Ed flew a long distance and thought that his sword, which he had bought on the way here, was almost broken. He looked at the cracks on his sword and said that he needed to finish it. A piece of meat that was lying on a plate flew to the side. Ed looked at it in horror and thought, damn. The food fell out. He looked at Alexis, from whom the light was emanating. Ed asked his pose. Was he really going to use a real sword strike? Glowing energy came from Alexis. He said moonbeam. He lunged forward, and magical waves erupted from the sword. Ed thought that if he used invisibility and then dodged, he could counterattack, but he couldn't. After all, the hero should see in him not only a squire, but also his comrade. He will have to use his skills that he gained while passing through other worlds. He jumped towards the magical waves and said that he was obliged to repel the blow. Alexis moved his hand to the side, and Ed thought that he needed to hit exactly like him. He attacked him and shouted, take it! After which Ed flew to the ground, and Alexis looked at him and said that this was not bad. Landing on his feet, Ed exhaled and looked at the broken sword and said that he managed somehow. A crowd of people immediately looked at him. They shouted that he was amazing. What a cool guy. Someone said that this was the first time he had seen someone fight on equal terms with a hero. Ed looked at everyone in confusion. A girl from the crowd pressed her hands to her chest and said that although the hero was cute, that guy was also not bad. The girl who was standing next to her asked, what type of guys does she like? Would she like to come over and ask his name? Suddenly, someone next to them shouted, Ed, that's how he introduced himself. It turned out to be an old man, and he said that even a commoner like him could understand that a great future awaited him. Someone asked the old man who he was? And why does he look like he's rummaging through trash? The old man asked who he was? His name is... Before he could finish speaking, someone hit him and shouted that Mr. Alexis was coming here. Ed looked at the hero and shouted, hey! What is he even thinking about? If he had not parried the blow, he would have died. Alexis asked, huh? He apologized to him, and then said that he never thought about such an outcome. Ed stood in shock. The crowd laughed. Someone shouted that here was their hero. Gonzo folded his arms and said that it was one thing for a hero to fight at full strength, but another thing for some upstart to fight him. He is Gonzo the Wasp. They will know each other. Ed was surprised. Martial artist Gonzo? Gonzo pointed at Alexis and told Ed not to be mad at him. Although he fought with him seriously, he kept a close eye on him, and if something went wrong, he would instantly protect him. Ed said, clear? Gonzo leaned over and scratched his beard. He asked Ed to tell him how he knew him. Ed smiled awkwardly and said that was a stupid question. He is the most powerful martial artist in the world. Gonzo laughed and said that's it. He is the strongest man. Alexis also laughed and said that he does not envy his enemies, because they see him first. Ed looked at them in surprise and then asked what the two of them were doing. Suddenly Tia approached them from behind. She said that she had only left them for a couple of minutes. She told Alexis to look what he did. The hero exhaled and closed his eyes and said that he didn't do anything. Just showed the average adventurer a little about the difference in their strength. Tia approached him and asked what does a little mean. He used a special technique on him. Then she turned to Gonzo and asked, why was he standing there? Why didn't you stop him? Gonzo, continuing to laugh, answered why, when the hero always has everything under control. Ed thought that this was the first time he had heard such dialogue, but nostalgia for those old days was already creeping through him. Someone said, oh my god, hey? Tia bowed her head and looked up at Ed. She asked how he was. Okay. Dee thought that he remembers her voice, her face, her name. He remembers everything. Tia asked again, are you injured? She then apologized to him and pointed her finger at him and said that she was Lunarisha, an elf and a spirit summoner. She travels with Alexis. The girl smiled, Ed awkwardly replied that he was Ed Esquire, an adventurer. Ed thought that he would like to look at her smile again. Tia repeated his name, and then said that she was pleased to meet you. Suddenly tears flowed down Ed's cheeks. The group of heroes looked at him in shock. Tia fussed in front of him, running from side to side. She asked why he was crying. Hey Ed? Did she do something wrong? He thought that Tia was the one. She's alive. Tia turned around and asked if it was him. She pointed her finger at Alexis and told him to say what else he did to him. Alexis folded his arms across his chest and, leaning against the wall, asked, maybe stop making false accusations against him, Tia? He didn't do anything like that with him, they didn't even really talk to him. He straightened his hair and said that he thought it was all about his good looks. Tia shouted, stop talking nonsense, Alexis. Ed said it wasn't about him. Wiping away his tears, he said that the whole group of the heroes simply remembered him, and he even felt somehow embarrassed, because when would he get such a chance again? Tia turned to him and asked, is it true? So does that mean it's her fault? She apologized to him and asked how she could improve? Ed said, come on. But if she doesn't mind, he asked just to call him by his name again, please. The girl awkwardly asked, should I call her by name? Fine. She put her index finger to her cheek and asked shyly, Ed? He shouted joyfully, yes. She smiled into her fist and told Ed that he was so funny. Even though they just called him by name, for some reason he is very happy. Suddenly Alexis said that he couldn't blame him for the tears, but Ed looked at him questioningly. The hero pointed his finger at the cut meat that was lying nearby and asked Ed to look there. He cannot accept it, because then their luggage will also be lost. Ed looked at the meat and suddenly perked up. He formed 2 fingers into a goat symbol, and then leaned towards the meat and shouted, what? Was the meat cut? It's all because of his technique. Alexis stood over him with his arms folded. He said it was his food. He looked at Tia, who clenched her fists and looked at him hopefully. He asked what? She asked if he didn't want to take Ed? Doesn't Alexis understand how strong he is? Let him see that even people are angry with him. He used his special move, and Ed survived. She pointed to the crowd of people. Someone shouted that he saw everything. Him too. He really used it. They saw everything. Alexis asked the girl why she wanted him to join them so badly. They have enough fighting power. Tia thought about it, and then said that it was because she felt that they needed him. Alexis asked if she doesn't care at all, right? Tia stuck out her tongue and said he was a fool. The girl turned to Gonzo and asked, what would he say? Gonzo looked up and asked, is he? He really doesn't care. Tia said then. Gonzo interrupted her and said, but if he really carries their luggage and still fights, his fate is too difficult. If he just accepted the job of transferring the luggage, then Alexis would definitely agree to accept him. Tia continued to look pitifully and said, but Ed clenched his fist and lower lip. He said, damn. And he really wanted Master Gonzo to teach him his muscle-building techniques. Gonzo didn't hesitate and held up a sign that said 10 and said he was accepted. Tia also held up the same sign and shouted, hooray. Boy, he'll take care of him. Alexis exhaled and said that okay, he will agree. He wields a sword well and is unlikely to become stronger than him, but the hero tossed Ed a coin. Alexis said he only needed someone to carry the luggage. And if he copes with this job, then he has no complaints against him. He extended his index finger in front of his face and said, one more try. He must buy everything he considers necessary and bring it here. He pointed his finger at Ed and said that if he wanted this job so much, he had to show him everything he could do. Ed accepted the coin confidently. Alexis told him to buy whatever he needed with this money, and then he would see whether he was worthy of their group or not. Ed said he could handle it, and that they should trust him. Gonzo wished him luck. Tia said she'll keep her fingers crossed for him. The hero's first mission. Ed looked at the coins in his hand and said, so he has 10 silver coins in total. He looked at one of the coins and asked, what is it? Wow, gold coin. He was already thinking how he could get out of these 10 coins, but he gave him more? Ed thought about what it means now he trusts him more than the first time. If yes, then there must be some other influencing factors on this. Suddenly someone behind him said that she thought she had seen a lot in this city. But I didn't know there was such an area here. Tia followed Ed as they walked along a busy street. Ed saw her and, confused, asked her what she was doing here. She held her hands to her sides and told him to address her as a friend. Ed asked what? She asked why he started calling her as if she was older than him. The path, as before, addresses her as a peer. Ed smiled awkwardly and said that he just wanted to show respect to his elders. Tia smiled and repeated as if she were the same age. Fine? Ed answered confused, okay. Then he turned away and turning to Tia asked why she followed him? She chuckled and said that she was just curious, so she followed him with her tail. He asked, isn't she afraid to follow a guy she's seeing for the first time? Tia laughed and answered, yeah, especially when he is so strong that he can fight Alexis on equal terms with the hero. Two men were sitting at a table opposite each other. They heard their dialogue. Tia raised her index finger up and said that she would tell her a secret she wasn't in the heroes group for her pretty face. She looked at Ed and asked, do you understand? Then she looked at him with interest and asked what was wrong with him. Is he okay? While Tia walked a little further and looked around trying to figure out where they were. Ed thought that she was really outgoing, but very shy around strangers. No, he didn't believe it. Time has definitely turned back. So why? He looked at her and wondered if she still had memories. At this time, Gonzo asked Alexis if he was sure sending Tia with him was a good idea. The hero replied that he did not think that the guy was up to anything bad. And besides, this was Tia's wish. She didn't even listen to him. What freedom-loving elves. Alexis hit something with a hammer. Gonzo laughed and said that there's no arguing about that. Alexis asked Gonzo, is he doing the right thing? Gonzo leaned in to take a closer look and said yes. Without a doubt. The owner of the tavern approached them from behind. He pointed his finger in the direction of Alexis and said, forgive him, O generous hero, but maybe he will still do the repairs? Alexis turned to him and asked, does he mean that he doesn't know how to fix furniture? Yes? The tavern owner answered in confusion that no, under no circumstances. The hero said that he shouldn't worry, he'll fix everything. After all, he broke it. The tavern owner answered as you wish. After some time, Alexis stood with a hammer in his hands near a beautiful table decorated with various carved details. He said that he thought it was good for the first time. No wonder he is still a hero. The crowd gathered around stood with their eyes wide open in shock. The tavern owner thought, how did he do this? When Alexis walked away from the table, men ran up to him and began to look at his work. They said that the table was amazing. Luxurious. The hero called Gonzo and said that they had to go. Still, he is curious. At the same time, Tia asked Ed, curious? He answered no. But some interest still gnaws at him. He asked why she would follow him into such a wilderness? She scratched her chin and thought. She repeated, why? Why? Walking further through the narrow streets, Tia said that they, elves, live longer than people. It is already more than 100 years old. She has lived too long, so many of her memories have already been forgotten. She extended her hands to Ed and said, but little does he know, they also have very dear memories. And they, the elves, seal them in their souls. And if they do not want to lose them, then these memories, together with the soul, pass on to them. Everything that was put into the soul remains with them forever. Tia thinks this is the reason. Because then she saw him. She thought about how she had seen his face before and remembered everything about him. She said the memories of him were carved into her soul. Little does he know, it's like what they call déjà vu, but for them elves it's not much. Ed interrupted her and asked if she believed it. She said she believed. She straightened a lock of her hair and said that she clearly saw what happened to it. And who knows, maybe these memories will one day come true for her. Ed looked at her and said, that's it. He extended his hand to his side and said, if so, then she should come here. And let him hug her. The girl pressed her fist to her mouth and laughed, and asked why he was so harsh. Ed shouted at her to make up her mind. Either I don't like him serious, or he's friendly. Tia laughed and told him not to worry, she was joking. Do people have what is called a soul? Is it possible to restore all memories? Ed and Tia continued to walk through the destroyed streets. She asked where they were going. He replied that there was a good place around the corner. He thought that if he were in her place, he would definitely not be able to restore his memories. After all, this is an ability only of its kind. After a while, he pointed somewhere to the side and said, look, that's where they want to go. I asked, how does he know these places? He thought that if people had such an ability, then their memories should be awakened. Ed replied that he was a master of his craft, and knew how to collect information well. Tia said it was amazing. He wondered if they could hide it. In front of them stood a building that was decorated with beautiful carvings, and on the roof of the building stood 4 majestic angels. Ed and Tia looked at it confused, and then Ed asked what the hell? What's wrong with the roof? A voice behind them said that they had broken it in battle. He became curious and decided to try to fix it. Alexis said, did he know? It was easier than he thought. That's because he's a hero. Tia and Ed looked at Alexis in surprise. Ed thought it tasted funny. The crowd of people that surrounded the building shouted, this is what their hero is like. He's amazing. Alexis, turning to Ed, asked, well, how are things with him? Tia stood between them and, turning to Alexis, said that Ed was great. Alexis thought about it and said that he didn't see any purchases. Suddenly a huge mountain of food appeared in front of them. Alexis asked, what is this? Ed raised his index finger up and said, first, food. There is a supply for 10 days, and it can be stored for as much as 3 months. And also products for 10 days, which can be stored for a year. He heard from Tia that they were leaving immediately. So I took everything canned. Gonzo jumped up from his seat and pointed his finger at it and shouted, stop. What kind of bag does he have? Where is she from? Ed thought about it and said, oh, the bag, he found this in some ruins. Can store quite a lot of things. Very roomy, does he know? Gonzo looked at him with bulging eyes, and the hero asked, is this an artifact? Ed raised his index finger and said he didn't know, maybe. But only he can use it, others will not succeed. He thought that naturally he had lied. He said that in any other hands it would not show its properties. Tia arched over on the floor and tried and put her hands in the bag. She said that she wanted to get inside, but she couldn't. Oh, what a pity, meow. Alexis told her not to act like a cat. Ed thought that he had once been expelled from the hero's group. It wouldn't hurt to be extra careful. He only used one of his exile skills, namely the Exiled treasury. He places his hand there and uses the ability. There was a portal inside the bag. He turned to Alexis and asked what he would say. The hero sat down on the bed and rested his chin on his hand and asked, how much can fit in there? Ed said, who knows, but a couple of bags will fit in there. He can't say for sure. In fact, it is limitless. Tia looked proud. She had a bag on her head. She said that they could buy for the whole year at once. Well? Ed is great? Alexis asked why she was so proud of him. Ed, lifting the bag from Tia's head, said that he would continue, he would go further. Artifact that creates water. He placed a metal device with a tap. The hero tensed and said, well, this is better than the neck of a wineskin. And then, turning to Tia, he asked, didn't she tell him? She put her hands forward and said what she said. Raising his hand up, the hero said that their group did not need water. Tia can create water with her magic. So why did he buy it? Tia looked offendedly to the side and said that he was now scolding him here, and the artifact cost as much as 50 silver coins. Alexis was surprised. He clarified, 50 silver coins? Tanya asked, is it expensive, right? But Ed insisted. The hero said it was the opposite. Too cheap. Such artifacts must cost at least 5 gold coins. Tia shouted, 5 gold coins? The hero looked at it and asked if he could ask why. Ed put his hand to his heart and bowed his head and said, naturally. With it, they may never need water. Yes, he agrees, they can ask Tia to create water. Gonzo crossed his arms and asked, that's it, he says it himself. So what's the point? Ed raised his index finger and asked, but what if Tia gets hurt or gets sick? Then you can forget about water. He said exactly that. Alexis lowered his head and said thoughtfully, and it's true. It is too risky to rely on one person for such an important matter. He forgot that Tia is also a living creature. She looked at him with displeasure and shouted, so she was just a tool? Alexis then said okay, he accepts it. Tia looked proud and asked, so what? Now he's going to say Ed is amazing? The hero exhaled and said that he would never understand why she was so proud of him. Sighing again, he said, okay. He's amazing. Welcome to the hero's team. Tia, Gonzo, Ed raised their hands up, high-fived each other and shouted, hooray. Gonzo hugged Ed and asked, can a good piece of adamantite fit in the bag? He promised to teach him everything he knows. Ed thought, damn, why did he bribe his voice with these words? Alexis, pointing at Ed, said, by the way, he sees that he also bought himself a new sword. The hero raised the sword in front of him, and then said that, to be honest, he thought he would spend most of the money on this. His skill is akin to his. So why did he buy the cheapest sword? Alexis shoved the sword back to Ed. The guy said that he would replace him in another city. The hero asked again, in another city? Ed said he had a proposal. He thought that in fact, this was all his cunning plan. He said that he knew a good place. There they can get used to his fighting style and at the same time go to one dungeon. He thought that he was experiencing all this for the second time. The hero closed his eyes and said that it sounded good. Ed thought that he knew the event of the whole world 6 months in advance. He grinned and said, "That's great." After some time, they found themselves in the mining and blacksmithing city of Atholmtine. Let the journey of the hero and his group begin. Tia looked out of the carriage smiling and straightened a lock of her hair and said, "Wow. There are so many chimneys here. And these are all blacksmiths. What if they have good weapons for them?" Alexis looked at her and said he didn't think so. Tia looked at him and asked why. After some time, they walked through the stone city, climbing the stairs. Alexis said it's because they have a silver mine here. This means that they also only work with silver. Tia looked at the blacksmith who was forging metal. She suddenly understood and she said, "So that's what Ed was talking about then. So there's a legendary silver knife here that makes food 100 times tastier?" Ed looked at her and said that he never said that. They were in one of the rooms of a large stone building. Alexis sat down on a chair and said, "And so," he asked to explain his plan to him. Ed said that in short, the information is from a reliable source, it can be trusted. He is told that there are stone worms in the mine. The whole group looked at the guy and asked in unison, "Stone worms?" Ed answered yes. He thought about how rock worms feed on ores and minerals. On their first playthrough, they provoked a global crisis because they ate all the silver in the city. And 3 months after that, the tunnels collapsed and the city was destroyed. That's why he called them here. Alexis stood up, looked somewhere to the side and said, "Yes, the situation is really serious." Ed thought that later it would be too late. But now. The hero went to the window and leaning his head on his hand, he asked why he didn't report this to the authorities. They would have sent the knights right away. He thought that they could prevent a disaster. Ed laughed and said he was funny. Where's the proof? They won't trust an ordinary adventurer. That's why he decided to enlist their help. Suddenly Alexis asked, "Then what treasure was he talking about earlier? Is it really about Mithril?" Tia asked Gonzo, "How are Mithril and Rockworm related?" Gonzo told her to ask them instead. Alexis lowered his eyes and asked, "She doesn't know what Mithril is?" Tia said of course she knows. It enhances magic well, and is also very rare. Is she right? She raised her index finger and said, "What else? The best enchanted tools and weapons. Made from Mithril." She smiled and said, "Can he see? She knows a lot." Alexis hit himself in the face with his hand and asked Ed to explain it to her, please. Ed laughed and said, "Yeah, Tia, she's right, but not quite. Roughly speaking, Mithril is silver that has been exposed to mana for a long time, and thereby changed its properties." Tia raised her hand and shouted that she understood. "There's a lot of mana in the mine." Ed crossed his arms and said that's not true. There are no magical springs in the mine. Tia said then, "The stone worm's mana filled the silver." Ed pointed his finger at her and smiled and said that she almost got it right here. He offered to give me a hint. "What do rockworms eat?" She answered, "Ore." Ed asked, "What kind of ore is there?" Tia replied, "Silver." And then he asked, "What had a magical effect on silver?" She replied, "A stone worm." Ed told her to look now. Silver must be heavily saturated with mana before it becomes mithril. And where can you get so much mana from a worm? That's right, inside the worm itself. In other words, mithril is the undigested feces of a stone worm. Alexis looked at him and said that he wanted to get himself a stone worm in order to get mithril. But why does he need it? Ed smiled and said it was so they could have the best weapons. Tia burst into tears and her gaze was blank. She said, "Pook, no." A group of men in work uniform gathered near the mine. One of the men asked, "Is it okay that they are going home?" The man adjusted his cap and said that yes, everything is fine. Suddenly the man who was standing nearby shouted, "Hey you!" He clenched his fist and shouted that the hero and his team were off to mine mithril. Why the hell do they leave work? The man who was sitting next to them asked if he didn't know. The hero didn't tell him? He asked, "Hero?" He replied that he said not to enter the mine until the end of the day. He will pay them for their day's work. And honestly, he doesn't know what they will do there. The hero's group entered the mine. Gonzo, who was walking behind, asked, "Does this mean a worm lives here?" "Somehow I can't believe it, because it's pretty quiet here." Alexis, who was walking in front of him, said, "Most likely if the rumors about the worm are true, then he should be resting now." Ed turned to Tia and asked if she is still angry with him. She started hitting him on the back and said that she thought that mithril was always mined in the mines. Why did he tell her how he actually gets it? Ed smiled and apologized to her. He said that he thought everyone knew this. Tia said he was mean. Gonzo then asked why don't they just buy mithril. This is clearly better than looking for worm shit. Ed looked around and said that if they had a lot of money, they could buy it. And so they will receive it completely free of charge and of the best quality. Tia asked, the best? Alexis looked down and said that rockworms digest everything in their stomach. As a result, there will be no impurities there. In other words, his shit is pure mithril. And this can be used to make the best weapon. Tia looked at him and asked, Alexis, does he really need more weapons? Alexis asked, huh? For what? He also has a holy sword. She said it wasn't fair. Then Alexis, turning to Ed, asked if he was sure they were going in the right direction. Ed answered yes. They are on the right track. He used the Exile skill Akashic Compass. Gonzo put his hand on Ed's shoulder and said that this thing allows you to determine the location of monsters, conveniently. It's just a pity that he can use it. Ed said he got this with his bag, so sorry. He thought that this was true, he was the only one who could use it all. Tia asked Ed, in what kind of ruins does he find all these cool things? He replied that it was a secret. After a while, going further down, Ed said that they had arrived. Tia clarified, have you come? There's a dead end right there. Or does he mean to say that the worm is on the other side? Gonzo asked, does this mean you have to break through the wall? He shouted that it was time to show off his muscles in all their glory. Ed put his hand forward and said that there was no need to break anything. He needs to calm down and wait. Tia looked at him in surprise and asked, okay? Ed told them to just wait. Tia asked what he was up to. Gonzo said he didn't know. Ed walked up to the wall and started kicking it. He used the Exile skill Ring Reflection. Everyone looked at him in confusion. They shouted, what is he doing? Ed? He's about to break his leg. Ed continued to throw punches and said everything was fine. He thought about how this skill allowed him to accumulate a charge for a strike. Accumulate. Accumulate. Tia screamed, Alexis, he has to stop Ed. He's here now. Alexis looked at him calmly and told her to just watch. Ed thought that he had accumulated enough charge energy. He releases it. Suddenly everything started to shake. They asked what the hell? Earthquake? Alexis said everyone get ready, it's going to come out. Gonzo yelled for them to stand behind him. He will stop it. He put his hands forward, stopping the worm's mouth. Gonzo shouted for them to attack. Someone started using spells. Spears of the Scarlet Sunset should pierce with flames. The hands of the four-fingered spirits must take them and direct their anger at his enemy. Pierce, tear, burn, destroy. Ed approached Alexis and said that his sword was bothering him. Alexis said that was his problem. The team struck the worm again and again. Tia got into a pose and said that Lunarisha is calling a volcanic spear. It should kill her enemy. A powerful magical projectile hit the target. Gonzo yelled for them to watch. This can't turn around. Damn it. The worm is leaving. Ed jumped to the worm's mouth and asked where he was going. This is his and only his. Everyone looked at him in shock. Tia shouted, Ed. The worm was swallowed by Ed. While he was sliding down the insides of the worm, he said that he would not let this one escape. He already said that it was only his. He thought that from the inside, he would cut the worm into pieces from the inside. He used a bloody sword. Tia continued to look at the worm in confusion and said, Ed. Gonzo held the worm up and shouted that he was in it. Tia ran up to Gonzo and asked him to save Ed. Gonzo said he's trying. Suddenly blood poured out of the worm's body and from there, holding mithril in his hands, Ed jumped out. He shouted, damn it. Yes, it stinks. Gonzo shouted in surprise, boy. When Ed landed, Alexis said that it would naturally stink, but he himself entered the worm's mouth. Ed said he knows. Well, he didn't think it smelled so bad there. Tia ran up to Ed and shouted that he was bleeding. Is he injured? He said that everything was fine and that she should not worry. Tia shouted that he was a fool. She burst into tears and screamed, why did he do this? Tia was worried about him. Ed looked at her and said, he is not so reckless and would never have done such a thing if he were not confident in his victory. He thought that she was worried about him, just like then. He apologized to her and said that he was truly sorry. He didn't think she would worry about someone she barely knew. Ed recalled the moments he had already lived and thought that nothing had changed. How many times has he already lived through this? Tia never changes. He said, well, as for him, he just doesn't want to burden them with unnecessary work. Tia lowered her head and said okay. Ed thought that she needed to become even stronger so that she would never worry about him again. He said, "Look here." "Here." He held out the stone. Someone asked, "Is this the purest mithril?" Tia said, "He's handsome, if you don't think about where he's from." Gonzo scratched his chin and asked if the worm would make such a large piece of mithril. Alexis said that this would be enough for them, but to be honest, this is the first time he has seen such a huge piece himself. Gonzo asked what? Tia asked Alexis if this is his first time seeing such a piece. And how much does it cost approximately then? He put his hand to his chin and said thoughtfully that he thought he could buy a small lock with this. They shouted in surprise, "A whole castle?" Alexis said that such pure mithril would make a first-class weapon, but if there were impurities in the item, it would not be possible to remake it. This means that they need a first-class blacksmith to work with such material. Tia kept repeating, "Wow, a castle!" Gonzo shouted in surprise, "How many items can he buy to train his muscles?" Alexis told them to wake up. He turned to Ed and said that since he knows about the purest mithril, maybe he knows who can work with it. Ed thought about it and said that on this score, he thinks that his blacksmith skills are enough to make anything out of it. Alexis looked at him in surprise and asked, "What?" A group of heroes stood near the forge. Ed was walking back and forth and saying, "Wow! Excellent quality stove and tools. Is he really allowed to work behind them?" They answered him, "Of course." The man said that under normal circumstances, they would have charged even the hero, but they saved their city, so everything is at their disposal. Alexis said there was no need for that, he would pay them anyway. The man smiled and said that he thanks him, "Honorable hero." Alexis turned to Ed and said that he had found a place for him, and was even ready to agree that he would do something. But if something doesn't work out for him, and he wastes mithril, does Ed understand what he's getting at? He smiled calmly and said naturally. Alexis turned towards the exit and said that they would leave him alone. Gonzo followed him and said, "Okay." Then, opening the door, Alexis turned around and looked at Tia, who was looking at Ed in confusion. He asked if she liked him. She looked at him and asked, "Eh?" Alexis said that when he wanted to join, she was the only one who put in a good word for him. Of course, he knows she's a softie, but doesn't she worry too much about him? Tia asked, "Right? Does he think so? I wonder why." Alexis and Gonzo were sitting in a tavern. He kept asking Alexis how could he say something like that. Alexis took a sip of his drink and asked, "Eh?" He said that he is the only one who worries about him. So this is Alexis. Or is he wrong? For this reason, he believed him and they came here. So I also left him mithril. Gonzo laughed and said that considering he wouldn't trust anyone with that, he was right. Alexis, looking at his reflection in the drink, said that after Ed joined them, he watched him for a long time. He wields a sword as well as he does, he has artifacts unknown to him, as well as a high level of knowledge about various monsters and their weaknesses. Even he was surprised by this, so, after all, he trusts him a little, but he is very curious. Gonzo continued to laugh and said that this looks like him. But why shouldn't Alexis tell him everything? The hero choked. At this time, Ed awkwardly told Tia that, how should I tell her, blacksmithing is not the most interesting thing to watch. She laughed and said she liked it. Tia doesn't look at the case, but at him. At that moment, Ed held the stone in his hands and asked what was wrong? But she sees him all the time anyway. She said yes, but she wants it that way, because he is capable of anything. Tia looked at him confused. Ed continued to deal with the matter and said that this is not true, he is not omnipotent. He looked at his hands and said that he always missed things that were important to him. He thought that this is why he doesn't want to make mistakes anymore, because for the second time he doesn't want to lose anyone. And with his exile skills, he will create the future. He will change the course of history. Tia watched with interest as Ed forged mithril. Ed thought that was why he would try his best. Over weapons that will change the world. A flying eye appeared and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Saiyan." He replied that yes, how cramped he is in this body. The eye said that a hero fought here. Saiyan asked, yes, he already knows about the purest mithril, what else? The eye said that the stone worm was defeated. He answered, that's how. Saiyan put his hand to his face and said that then they will continue to watch, because this is his job as an intelligence officer. He thought that first, they should report everything to the Demon Lord. Ed was carrying Tia on his back and running quickly. He turned to her and asked whoever joined them, what did he look like? She thought about it and said that at first glance, he was a simple guy, but his name was Symbols. Well, he has a very noticeable nose. Tia sat leaning against the wall, opened her eyes and thought that she had a dream how she and Ed lived happily together. I wonder what he's up to. After all, they only recently met him. Ed was covered in sweat. He looked at Tia and asked apologetically, "Did he wake her up?" She said that's not true. He should forgive her for falling asleep. Ed smiled and said that's great. He asked if he could sleep then? She thought he even burst into tears when he saw her. And from that moment she had the feeling that they had known each other for a long time. But even so, to be close to him. Tia apologized and said that she herself would like to take a little more nap. She thought it gave her pleasure and joy. Ed was breathing heavily. He said how hot it is here. He remembered something and said, exactly the same. He thought that he took everything that he had received over 100 years of travel with him, but he could not use it, otherwise he would give himself away. That's why he even had to remake his sword, but even so, he can use his memory and skills. Ed looked carefully at the device on his hand. Saiyan looked out the window and asked, is it him? The one who ruined all their plans? The eye screamed, he. Saiyan said that according to his information, he should just carry them in his luggage. The eye repeated, suspicious. Suspicious. He continued to ask that, so why does he do blacksmithing? He's kind of strange. The eye said, kill him. Kill him. Saiyan said, no, not yet. We need to keep watching. The creature asked why not. He replied that he knows that in the human body, he is limited in strength. If they have to fight, then people will know who he is. The eye said that it seems that he is not acting according to plan, Mr. Saiyan. He got angry and shouted, oh, he forgot who he's talking to. Maybe teach him a lesson? He used metamorphosis and turned into a shadow lizard. He said that they would wait and collect information, and would act when they learned more. The eye turned to the gentleman and wished him good luck. Gonzo asked Ed if he was done. He looked at the hard worker and asked what he did in 6 days. Ed replied that he was engaged in blacksmithing almost all the time, allocating time only for sleep and food. Alexis asked if he could tell him if he was sure they didn't waste the material. Ed said, naturally. He created the best weapon. Gonzo shouted with excitement, boy. Let's get down to business. Ed told Gonzo to wait. It was not for nothing that he was preparing such a pretentious speech. So there you go. With this. Ed raised the hand that had the device on it. Tia asked, what is this? Could this show the location of monsters? Or what does it do? Ed told them to let them finish the story. Saiyan continued to watch them and asked the creature if he had finished his weapon, sword, gloves, and silver staff? And he spent all the mithril on this? He turned to the eye and said that although, does it know that he is also curious. What did he do? He thought that with the exception of the hero's sacred sword, this weapon should still not pose a threat to them, but for some reason he was a little scared. Saiyan looked at the group of heroes and thought maybe kill them right now. Ed turned around and looked at Saiyan. He hid behind the wall and asked, did he notice him? No. From this distance he won't believe it. Saiyan asked the eye to have it waiting for him here. The eye said, I obey. He used metamorphosis and turned into a dark bat. He thought that he should report everything to the Lord. This new guy is very suspicious. He noticed him when even the hero couldn't. Flying over the stone city, he wondered what was wrong with his eyes. He looked at him like he was prey. Is he prey? His prey? No, it should be the other way around. He doesn't believe it. Suddenly his wings pierced the crystals. He thought, what? Was he shot with ice magic? It is impossible to do this at such a distance. He collapsed to the ground. Ed landed in front of him. He greeted the general and said that he knew, and N had wanted to see him for a long time, but he did not think of meeting him so soon. Saiyan. The bat was surprised and thought, how does he know his name? Ed asked, oh, it was a secret, right? He apologized and said that he was already doing something in advance, although there was no point in remaining silent. Does he understand? He knows everything much better than him. Saiyan screamed, no. Gonzo and Tia came running from behind Ed. She screamed, Ed. Well, how? Ed turned around and said, oh, they're on time. Saiyan thought, who is he anyway? Ed said he was amazed she hit him from such a distance. Good job, Tia. She laughed back. Saiyan thought that this was impossible, so it turns out that he was being watched all this time. Gonzo scratched his chin and asked, so this demon was following them? Ed said, yeah, that's him, and anyway, what enemy wouldn't use reconnaissance? Tia asked, what are they going to do with him, Ed? The demon shouted, stop. He turned back into human form and said that he was not their enemy. He is the Demon Lord's ambassador. Saiyan thought that it looked like the hero was not here. He said he needed to talk to the hero. Tia made a dissatisfied face and said, denied? The demon sat on his knee and said that he had come to talk about reconciliation. Ed smiled ominously and said that the hero would not come here. They asked him to do something else. And right now he is evacuating residents. And anyway, what kind of truce? Coming from the mouth of a demon, it even sounds funny. Ed looked at him menacingly and said that they do not and will not have any peace. The demon laughed and asked, what will he do? Will he kill? Let him try. According to him, he, the little man, greatly exaggerates his strength. But he's not even a hero. He removed the metamorphoses and shouted that they were fools. They considered him weak? Let's see who kills who else. He has turned into a tyrant of death. Saiyan shouted, he will kill them. All of them. He will kill first. Tia covered her eye from the rising wind and said how huge it is. Is this his true form? Ed said it's good that the hero began to evacuate the residents. He shouted that he was very strong. Beware! Saiyan began to attack, and Gonzo activated his aura shield. A group of heroes rose into the air. The demon said that he would not forgive them. If only they knew how much he hates this form, because it is very cruel. He screamed at the top of his lungs and there was no stopping him now. He will turn everything into dust. He hit the sides of himself. A group of heroes prepared to attack. Ed loudly asked Gonzo to stop. He asked if he could definitely handle the new weapon. Gonzo answered yes, easily, and again activated aura shield. A cloud of dust appeared around, magical sparks came from everywhere. The demon asked what? He thought there was a protective spell that covered the entire city? During his reconnaissance, he could not find it among them. Tia shouted, Gonzo. He mustn't forget that he and Ed are here. Alexis stood on a rock, not far from the battle, and watched what was happening. He said it was amazing, such strength, and just from one weapon. What is the power of the weapon created by Ed? Ed, who are you? Alexis remembered how Ed handed the gloves to Gonzo. He clarified, gloves? Ed said, yeah. By collecting mana in your fist you can even destroy the whole world. Gonzo swung and said, mana in his fist, that means. The demon shouted that he would kill them all. Gonzo pointed his glove at him. Saiyan thought that this couldn't happen. His hand. Tia said, wow. They were able to tear off his limb. Gonzo smiled and said, great. Boy, this really is the best weapon. The demon thought it was because of the weapons that they had become too strong. Gonzo screamed that he was even stronger now. He wants to fight with him again. Demon Saiyan thought, hero, he doesn't feel the power of the sacred sword. Why did this happen? He looked at Ed and thought, is this all his doing? Yes, definitely him. He must report everything to the Lord. He buried himself in the ground. Gonzo shouted, has he decided to kill himself? Ed said that's not true, he's going to run away. He has changed his appearance and is trying to leave. The demon thought that if he went underground, they would not be able to catch him. Tia activated the skill stone bonds. The demon in the form of a worm found himself shackled with stone hands. Tia asked for forgiveness and said that she didn't know how, but Ed had a good eye and you couldn't fool him. She recalled how she took her weapon. Ed said that he put the power of magic and spirits into it. So she is free to use it as she pleases. If she wants, he will make it so that she can even cast a spell on him. Gonzo turned to Tia and shouted, can she do that now? She said she didn't know. She looked at her sword and said that this magic should not have worked like this. But because of this sword, the unreal becomes real. Ed came closer to the worm and said, hello again, Saiyan. He asked what he would do next. Although he may not speak, he still already knows everything. Ed asked if he had any regrets. He should not worry, even if he dies, he will still be reborn and take revenge on him again. The demon asked, should I be reborn? What is he talking about? Ed said that he didn't need to know that anymore. He just wants revenge on him. The demon thought, so who is he? Who is he and where did he come from? Ed said he came from the future. He activated the skill Silver Wing Sword. Second world. His blows formed a kind of network. He continued to strike again and again, and then he clenched his fist and thought that it was all over. Tia ran up to him, she screamed, Ed. Is he safe? Gonzo ran after her and shouted, boy, how is he doing? Ed said that he killed him and then asked how they felt about his sword skill and his new sword. Not bad, right? Tia and Gonzo shouted at the same time, what a smug face. Tia approached the demon's corpse and asked if he was really able to defeat it. But he is safe and sound. Someone told her to take a closer look. Alexis came up to them and said that he cut it as if he was driving a blade through butter. The lines are very straight and smooth. Perhaps he even died without understanding anything. The guys shouted, amazing. The hero said that for such a technique you need to master the sword and have the same incomparable blade. Ed laughed, scratched his head and said he still had a lot to learn. And he made the sword in a hurry. Alexis looked at it and said he was a hero. This title is far from a decoration. And he can swear that among people there is not a single craftsman capable of making a weapon with such characteristics, let alone in a short time. He worked alone and did not let anyone near him. Alexis told him to tell him who he was. What is he hiding from them? The hero Alexis is the prince of a great country, chosen by the sacred sword as the only person capable of defeating the demon lord. He is the hope of humanity. Will they be able to get along with him now? His arrogance, corresponding to his status, sometimes bordered on arrogance and coldness. In his first circle, he did not get along very well with him. From his current point of view, his disdainful views were very different from his. To be honest, he hates it. The hero is the hope of humanity. He is above all others. Ed asked in surprise, what? What does he have to hide? He thought that it seemed that he had been discovered. He asked why he decided so. Alexis looked at his weapon and said, his sword, it's not just a piece of mithril. He doesn't understand how he changes his shape and turns into a super sharp blade. Ed held the sword out in front of him and told him to watch. He turns some of the mithril into wings, so the blade becomes thinner and sharper, but he can make a maximum of 12 wings. But the more there are, the easier it is to break it. He thought that although this was not happening with magic, but with his ability, as an exile, a skilled master. Ed said that he expected nothing less from the hero and immediately saw through him. The group of heroes looked at Ed in surprise. Alexis said he was paraphrasing. He asked, as a blacksmith, what heights does he strive for? Ed thought, oh, so that's all he cares about. He thought he had it figured out. Ed was confused and said that, as it were, he wants to forge swords that can cut anything, he believes. Alexis said this is a typical goal. But Ed, hasn't he already forged such a sword? Tia asked what? Alexis, why does he think that? Alexis said that whether it was a prototype or something else would be a different matter. But he said this is a temporary solution. This means that under better conditions, he can create a better sword. He asked Ed why he said his sword was a temporary solution. Why couldn't he create something better? What was missing? Materials? Equipment? Ed thought that this sword was impossible under the current conditions. He said the main problem is the materials, you can't just buy them, so. He thought that he had already obtained everything he needed long ago in other worlds. Alexis looked at him suspiciously and said that's it. He turned around and said, okay, let's clean up here first. They need to repair the destroyed wall. He thinks it will be easy. Tia remembered the building with angels on the roof and asked again, shall we repair it? She shouted for Alexis to wait. She put her hand to her chest and said that she and Gonzo would fix the wall. Agree? Alexis thought a little and said, why should he be against it? Tia and Gonzo ran forward. She screamed, let's go, Gonzo. Run! Ed coughed and said, oh well, he'll go help them. Alexis told him to wait, he had another task for him. The hero took Ed by the shoulder and told him to come to his room alone. He had a conversation with him. Ed's face became covered with sweat. He asked, Tia was engaged in the reconstruction of the wall, she said. In the name of Lunarisha, she conjures for it to appear. Hand of the earth. Tia used magic to create stone hands with which she carried large stones. A group of people crowded around her. They said, this is an elf from the hero's group. She was surprised, looked at them and asked, Sorry, they punched a hole in their wall. But now they will fix everything. The man told her not to worry, she would be fine. They surrounded her and said, because they saved their city. Many thanks to them. Thank you, Ms. Lunarisha. He even envies her. Tia put her hands forward and laughed out of awkwardness. She said, well, they are heroes, after all, they work for the benefit of people. Someone said, if so. So they will quickly finish off the demon lord? They are counting on them. Tia put her hand to her chest and said yes, they will definitely bring peace to this world. She raised her hand up and shouted what to their power. The demon lord is just a weakling. The crowd screamed, weakling. She shouted that they would defeat the demon lord's army. And the crowd repeated, they will win. Gonzo walked up to the crowd, laughed, and said sorry Tia. But they can't resist his muscles. The crowd was surprised, such a huge stone. He held the stone on his shoulders and said that the same thing would happen to the demon lord. He placed the stone on the ground. Tia said she didn't expect anything less from him. He has the strongest muscles in the whole world. She smiled and Gonzo patted her on the head. He told her that everything was okay. Tia was surprised. He looked down at her and said that the more they fight, the higher the expectations from them. This is also their duty as the hero's partners, but with him, she doesn't need to pretend harder. Tia smiled and thanked Gonzo. He closed his eyes and told her not to worry. He remembered Ed and said that with that boy, they became much stronger. So she doesn't have to worry, they will defeat the demon lord. Tia looked up at him and thanked him again. Gonzo laughed and asked, by the way, where are Ed and Alexis? Tia said she doesn't know. At the forge, Alexis asked Ed if he would have tea. Ed thought, what the hell is going on now? Alexis said, alas, he's not very good at brewing this. The taste may not be very good. Ed held the mug in his hand and said, no, it's okay. He thought that he was too calm. It scares him. He also invited me to talk to him face to face, really? Ed awkwardly asked, His Highness? He seemed to want to talk to him there, didn't he? Ed was nervous and wondered if he really wanted to expel him. Alexis took the sword and said that he called him to look at it. He handed him the sword, and Ed asked, is it a holy sword? Alexis said he could take it out. Ed asked, seriously? He took the hilt of the sword and thought that he had seen this many times in battle, but this was the first time he was holding it in his hands. He asked Alexis if he's sure he doesn't mind. Ed thought that Alexis always got really angry if someone touched his sword. Ed said, why should he what? The hero asked, did you guess? Ed said how to put it, he feels that his holy sword is definitely of excellent quality. Alexis clarified, excellent quality. Ed, why does he think this sword is excellent? Ed thought about it. He thought that this was undoubtedly a masterpiece created from different metals. This definitely cannot be forged without the proper skill. The hero closed his eyes and said that he knew that he would understand everything right away. His sword is not real. It is certainly beautiful, sharp and durable, but still a fake. Ed looked at the sword and thought that if he used his skill as a skilled craftsman, he thought he could create the exact same sword. But if so, what happened to the real holy sword? Ed looked at the hero and asked, where is the original? Where did he go? Alexis lowered his eyes and turned around. He said that he didn't know. His reconnaissance teams searched the world. But so far this has not been found. Ed asked, in other words, does everyone think it's real to be considered a hero? Alexis put the sword on the bed and said that he was already a hero. But if the ruler finds out that it is fake, then he himself will begin to look for it. If he finds it before them, they won't stand a chance. Alexis said that he had been deceiving everyone for a long time. But the sword is already in critical condition, and no one else in the world will be able to forge a sword better than this. I couldn't until now. Alexis looked at Ed and asked if he could create a sword better than this. Ed thought that with his knowledge and experience from his past life, as well as his skills as an exile, he might be able to forge a better sword. But even so, it will still only be a copy of the holy sword. He said that he was pleased that he believed in him, but Alexis didn't let him finish and bowed. He said, please, Ed. Ed jumped on the spot and looked at him in surprise. He asked, what? Eh? Alexis said that he would have any materials and equipment. He will provide everything, so please, he should create a sword for him. He asks, not like a hero. And what a prince? Ed said in confusion, what is he saying? It's no good for him to bow to him. Alexis looked at the floor and said that he was ready to bow his head if necessary. He's a hero. The future of all people is on his shoulders. His failure is the failure of humanity. Therefore, he must always bring hope and victory. Ed clenched his fist and asked, but how can he carry such a burden? He said that he was simply forced into this role of a victim, who was loaded without asking and forced to fight. A smart person like him already understands everything. So why? Why is he doing this? The hero said he was special. Everything he wants is available to him. Any of his most absurd desires are fulfilled. Therefore, he is obliged to make everyone's dream of peace and a bright future come true. That's why he asks him to do it with his own hands so that he remains a hero. Alexis clenched his fist. Ed thought, this means arrogance is pride, he has always been special. He always looked down on others because he was special. He doesn't need much effort to make his dreams and desires come true. He doesn't even need to be chosen, because he's been that way since birth. From the moment he was born, he was already a hero. This is what his soul is like. Ed said he'd get straight to the point. His sword will not be enough for the hero. The target is the real sacred sword. Where is he? Ed used the Exile skill Akashic Compass. He looked at the device that appeared on his hand. Alexis asked in confusion, "Isn't this an artifact for finding demons?" Ed said that he was sorry and that he was right. Yes, he was hiding a lot. She thought that if his identity and history were revealed, it would be very difficult to kick him out of the group. After such determination, he would not be a man if he did not agree to help him. Alexis continued to look at Ed in confusion and asked if he was a hero too. Ed asked, "So does he even need help finding the holy sword? If so, he will make a discount for him. Say so, his payment will be the death of the demon lord and peace for humanity. How about him?" They looked at each other, and Alexis smiled and said that he never ceases to amaze him. He agrees. He will pay such a price. Only he must take him to the real holy sword. Ed bowed his head and said, "Hero, as he wishes." The hero interrupted him and said his name. Ed asked, "Huh?" The hero said that he was no longer going to treat the one before whom he had to bow his head that way. Like Gonza and Tia, he is his true comrade. He should simply call him by his name. Ed said okay. He thought he was pretty surprised. He said that it would make him a real hero. They shook hands and Ed thought that he had finally become a true hero's comrade. In search of a real sword. Residents crowded around a recently destroyed wall, but it had now been repaired. They said, "Wow. Did Lady Tia fix it all in one day? Not only does it look amazing, but thanks to some spiritual magical power, it is much stronger than before." She stood in the center of the crowd. Addressing her, someone asked, "Is she leaving already? Could she stay a little longer?" Tia looked at them confused and thanked them and apologized. Her next destination has already been decided. Someone said, "Okay, well then," at least before she left, they asked her to take a look. This is their expression of gratitude. In front of the worm's corpse stood a large statue dedicated to Tia. Someone asked what she thought. They did their best to make it happen. Although this still does not fully reflect her great achievements. Gonzo and Ed looked at the statue and showed a thumbs up. And Alexis looked at it thoughtfully. Some man, turning to Tia, told her to listen. He still can't get her exploits of that time and hers out of his head. He really wants those who haven't seen it directly to feel it too. Tia asked confused, "Why only her?" Gonzo and Ed were there too. Alexis looked at the guy who had just asked the question and asked, "He seems to be missing something here. Did he do it?" The hero turned to him and took him by the shoulders. He asked how about lighting it from below with colored lights. The man said, "Amazing. He likes it." Tia screamed for them to stop. She didn't ask for that either. Alexis turned to Ed and said that he was counting on him. Ed said he understood. He thought that with the new goal of obtaining a real holy sword, they immediately got down to business. His compass shows only the final goal, but not the path, so the adventure awaits them is not an easy one. All they could do was follow to their destination. They visited beautiful fields, high mountains, dense forests, and even swamps. When a group of heroes saw a dungeon, they entered it, trying to find something interesting, but there was nothing there. He saw many beautiful landscapes and used a lot of emotions. On his first playthrough, none of this worked out for him. And so, after 3 months of wandering, he and his comrades arrived in a secluded northern country, deep in a foggy forest, sandwiched between high mountains. Someone asked Ed, "Is this by any chance the same place they just passed? Is he sure this is the right way?" The forest through which they walked was covered in thick fog. Ed said he's sure. Someone asked, "Fog that does not dissipate even in magic and spirits?" Turning to Tia, someone asked, "Does she know what the reason is?" She said that she would find out now. Yeah, that's how. She said that a rather strong spell had been cast over the entire forest. And a careless attempt to dispel it may activate another spell. And in general, the flow of mana here is somehow strange. Maybe it's a reaction to something? Tia asked, "Since what they are looking for is here, maybe it's because Alexis is with them?" The heroes' team looked at each other. Alexis said she saw through him. This time they definitely arrived where they needed to be. Gonzo stood behind them and smiled. He said, "Yeah? Finally. But you can't let your guard down, otherwise the same thing will happen as with Tia last month." She clenched her fists and screamed, "Hey! How could she have known that something like this would happen there? She pulled Ed by the cloak and said that the two would now discuss that incident for a long time. She asked him to help her with them. Ed said it looks like they really hit the jackpot this time. They were in a beautiful place. The floor was decorated with patterns. It was surrounded by huge stone statues in the form of knights. In the center of this place was a sword. The guy said, "Wow. What an amazing view." They approached the sword, which was stuck in the center of the floor. Ed called Alexis. And the hero said that deep in the forest of concealment, there is a source of purity, and in its depths the strength of the hero lies dormant. So, they finally came to the right place. Alexis stood in front of the sword and said, "Which means only a hero can come here." Gonzo and Tia looked at the hero in anticipation. And then, they gently pushed him forward. Gonzo told Alexis, "Come on, he should have done it already." Tia asked if a touching meeting awaits him, right? And wished him good luck. Alexis thanked them and then he turned to Ed and thanked him. He said that without him he would never have come here. Ed closed his eyes and said that was their deal. So he said not to be long. The hero said, "By the way, for that matter, why don't he try to pull it out?" Ed asked in surprise, "Huh? Why him?" Tia said, "Well, that sounds very interesting." Alexis said that only a true hero can obtain the holy sword. If it works, then he will also be a hero. The team looked at him admiringly. A group of heroes asked, "Is he serious?" Ed rolled up his sleeves and bit his tongue. He said, "If that's the case, he'll try it. He will never have another opportunity like this again." Gonzo raised his hand and shouted that he wanted to be next then. Tia also raised her hand and shouted that she wanted it too. Ed grabbed the handle of the sword and began to pull. Suddenly he asked, "Huh?" He thought it wasn't even moving at all. He could easily pull it out by simply moving it to his treasury, but that wouldn't be fair. He gritted his teeth. After a few tries, he hugged his knees and sat down next to Tia. Gonzo walked up to the sword, raised his hands and shouted that it was his turn. He grabbed the sword and pulled with all his might. He asked why. He has huge muscles. He had to force it out. Gonzo also hugged his knees and sat next to Ed, and he put his hand on his shoulder. Tia ran to the sword and shouted, "Hooray! It's her turn." After several attempts, she exhaled heavily and said, "It's not working." Alexis folded his arms and said okay. He didn't expect anything else. Tia said he was mean. Alexis came close to the sword and said, "Well." He thought that at last. He's the last one. The guys looked at the hero with excitement. Ed asked, "Is something wrong? Is it just his imagination, or is he really worried?" Tia said everything is fine. Alexis took the handle of the sword and thought that he would get it. Ed clenched his fists and shouted, "Wow! He can do it!" The guys shouted, "Come on!" And it's true. He can do it. He must remember about the muscles. The hero said, "God, such a historical moment, and they are so noisy." He began to pull the sword and thought that he was taking the sword in his hand. He asks himself if he is a real hero. Suddenly he finds himself in a room with a bed. He asked, "Is this a room in the castle?" "What the?" A girl was sitting on the bed. She was holding a baby in her arms. She said, "Alexis, his name is Alexis." She laughed and said that he seemed to like it that way. She is sure that one day, all the people in the world will know him. After all, he is special to her. Tears were running down the girl's face, and the baby seemed to wipe them away with his small hands. Alexis looked at this in shock and said, "Mom?" At this time, he continued to stand near the sword. The guys shouted, "Hey! Alexis! Is something wrong? Do they also think that he is not moving?" Ed decided to come closer and called him again. A huge stone hand descended in front of him. Gonzo asked, "Boy, how is he? These are golems, right? So there are also traps here?" Ed said he doesn't know, but... He shouted, "Hey! Alexis! He must wake up." Tia said that nothing will work out on him, he has strong magic. She sees that his consciousness is going somewhere. The group of heroes looked at the huge stone knights who were watching them. They asked. It turns out that they decided to tell them directly so that they would not interfere with judging the hero. At this time, a little boy, holding a book in his hands, approached the bed where his mother was sitting. He said, "Mom, please, she must read that story again." She laughed and asked, "Does he really like that story about the hero that much?" The boy looked at her admiringly. He said yes. After all, the hero will defeat the demon lord and save the world. She patted his head and asked him, "So in the future he wants to become a hero?" The boy said that of course he wants to. She said she was sure he would become one. She will wait for that day. The boy said he would try. After some time, the boy stood with the king near the coffin. The man put his hand on the boy's head. Alexis thought that from that day on, he constantly trained to become a hero and never rested. Even among heroes, he was special, but one meeting changed everything. He realized that he was not that special after all. He was trained by Gonzo, and Alexis thought, after all, he was an ordinary boy. At this time, Gonzo fought off the blows of huge stone hands and shouted, "Strong bastard!" I didn't think I could resist his fist. Tia ran along the limb of one of the knights and shouted that if physical attacks didn't work, she could try hitting with magic. I turned to Ed. She asked, will he help her? She yelled at Gonzo to cover Alexis. He answered loudly, I got it. Attacking the stone knight, Tia shouted, stop interfering with them. Gonzo was next to the hero and shouted, Alexis, how long is he going to sleep? In Alexis's mind, he continued to fight Gonzo. He thought that even though he understood his weakness, he did not give up his desire to become a hero. Whether it was delusion, nostalgia, or the stubbornness of a child chasing his mother, he always moved forward anyway. Alexis was on his knee. Several men in sacred robes stood in front of him. They said that today was the day they could put an end to the demon lord's tyranny. By the will of the gods, a new hero was born. They said that this news should be distributed to everyone. This person's name is Hero Alexis. The hero put his hand to his chest and said that he was obeying their majesty. He thought that then he had finally become the hero he had dreamed of, but did he really want it? Alexis said her magic was amazing. Tia laughed and thanked him. He told her that he would like to have such power with him, and then asked if she would like to join him. She asked confused, huh? Yes, but... Alexis said that then he will introduce himself again. His name is... Tia said nice to meet you, hero. She is Linerity. Alexis thought that he had gathered his comrades in the hope that they too would become stronger, but they still could not keep up with him. After some time, Alexis, from the memories, turning to Tia asked, is she sure? Is there really no other way out of this situation? She said she was sure. Although Ed is loyal to them, they can no longer protect him. The real Alexis asked what these scenes were. Tia said that even though Ed will hate her, she still wants him to remain alive and well. The real Alexis asked Ed. The heroes from the consciousness said, well, this is a reasonable decision. After all, if he follows them, then in the domain of the ruler he will certainly die. The real Alexis screamed, what the hell? Why are they showing this to him? This had never happened in his life. Why are they showing him an illusion? He thought, or is this not an illusion? Is the future possible? No, he has the feeling that he has forgotten these memories. It's like he's lost a lot. Returning to reality, he called Tia. Gonzo, now him too? Who is he fighting? He thought that he had never fulfilled a single promise he had made as a hero. He shouted, damn it! He thought about how there was nothing left at the end. Continuing to forcefully pull the sword, he shouted, why can't he take it out? Why? He thought about whether he really deserved to be a hero. Or is he not such a special hero? He watched as Gonzo stopped the stone knight's blow with his hands. He thought that he was a hero because he risked everything to save this world. And if he refuses this, he will be a fool, running away from problems, and will die with his pride. And he will have no future. Ed cut off half of the golem's head. All that was left of the stone enemies was fragments. Alexis thought that the end would come for humanity, and for him as a hero. He said clearly he understood. The hero thought, therefore, he will go to the end. The remaining stone knight looked at Alexis. The hero wondered if he was a real hero. Suddenly he shouted, but not to life. He never lived the life of an ordinary person. He always lived knowing that he would become a hero. He just resigned himself and played along with them. Everyone always treated him special. He admits, he was never a real hero. The stone sword was already above Alexis' head. Ed screamed, Alexis! What the hell is he talking about? Alexis shouted, but... Who decided that those who try their best are inferior to heroes? Ed? I did everything for him. And now? It's time for him to take a step forward. After all, he is a hero. After these words, he pulled the sword out of the ground. Everything around shone with a bright light. The powerful energy emanating from it headed towards the remaining knight, cutting him into small stones. The group looked at the hero in surprise. Ed said, Alexis, the sword is beautiful, like the radiance of the moon. Alexis said, so this is the power of the holy sword, period. With him, no, with his strength and their help, they will be able to reach the Demon Lord himself. He looked at the team and said they could win. Ed thought that this is how Alexis became a real hero. He said, yeah? Let's go. Gonzo said yes, of course. Tia said they will try hard. And then she asked, by the way, Alexis, what's wrong with his eyes now? And the moonlight shone in his eyes. He said that it seemed to be due to the use of a holy sword. Tia asked, are you serious? In the demon lands, they will have to fight against the demon lord. They walked through the dark forest. They stopped at one of the trees. Gonzo told Alexis that he should rest, he shouldn't worry, he'll stand guard. Alexis asked, what about Tia and Ed? Gonzo said that they were already asleep. Come to think of it, he was tired too. Alexis called Gonzo and said that although they had only known each other for a short time, he was very grateful to him. Gonzo asked what came over him all of a sudden. This is clearly not like him, or is he worried that he won't be able to say these words later? Alexis said that he didn't know, he just wanted to, because they were going with him to certain death, even though they had the right to leave and live the life they wanted. Gonzo said that's what he's saying, he doesn't think they can handle it? The hero replied that no one knows what awaits each of them in the future. Agree? Gonzo laughed and said that was true, but little did he know, if they needed determination to fight, those two didn't need anything at all. But he shouldn't worry, if anything happens, he will protect everyone with his muscles. Alexis said, Gonzo? If suddenly such a time does not come, he must forgive him for everything. Suddenly he shouted his name. Gonzo replied, got it. And prepared to strike, he used the spirit shield. Turning to the others, he shouted, hey people! Stop sleeping. Ed, who was right in front of the monster's mouth, said that he knew he should have warned earlier. Such an awakening is already too much. Okay, time is short, he'll go find out. Alexis shouted that he would figure it out himself, and he should cover him. Ed shouted okay. They were surrounded by countless monsters. Alexis shouted, die. Sword technique. Full moon sword. Powerful energy in the form of a ball spread throughout the area. Ed shouted, wow. That's why I wanted it myself. He looked at the compass on his hand and said that he had found the attacker. He asked Tia, is she ready? She said yes. She can handle it. Ed pointed his finger towards the high mountain and shouted, you can't hide anymore. Over there. The tallest tree. Tia took out her magic bow and shouted, Storm Ray. Ed thought, demon lands? This is a vast, dense forest that shares the domain of humans and demons. An uncharted territory teeming with all sorts of creatures. He is from the future, carrying Tia on his back using his skill the renegade step. It was an easy walk. But the usual step is just murderous territory. It will be difficult for even a hero to get out of there. The group sat on stumps near the fire. They said that they had already come so far. And now is the time to take a break. Tia said they only had canned food left. She sighed and said she missed home-cooked food. Ed laughed and said that when they returned to the city, he would definitely cook them something delicious. Gonzo said that all he needed to motivate him was delicious food, but it was very dangerous to cook in these parts. Tia said, yeah, they will wait until the city. Ed looked at Alexis and asked how he was. Must be tired after such complex technique? Alexis said that everything is fine, he shouldn't worry, although the technique is complicated, and he doesn't really know how to operate it, but he learns quickly. After all, he is a hero. Ed smiled and said, and that's true. Tia said that she thought it would be years before they could enter the demon land. And they came here only 6 months after they met Ed. She hopes they will continue to be together like this. The group looked at her and Gonzo said that he hoped too. Ed thought 6 months. As far as he remembers. One of the conditions for returning to the White World is to stay in it for more than 6 months. He can only wait until he is expelled from here. Gonzo extended his index finger and said that the entire day they spent together was more important than 10 years apart. He said it's all about the feeling. Tia said that she seems to be starting to understand him. Ed took a sip of his drink and thought, now that Alexis has a real holy sword, he is without a doubt a hero. Gonzo said that everyone likes his muscles. Ed thought that Alexis had become the most powerful being in this world. Tia and Gonzo are also with him. They are very strong, and since they traveled with the hero, they are clearly already known throughout the world. Tia asked, yeah? Is he not lying? Ed told Alexis to lie to him. The hero asked why? Ed thought, what about him? Although they fight together, his goal is different from theirs. Whether he stays or leaves, nothing will change. Even if he wants to, he is not allowed to be here. But staying here isn't such a bad idea. But his efforts are currently in vain. His soul longs to return home. Someone said they were almost there. Gonzo and Tia raised their drinks into the air. Gonzo shouted, "Let's defeat the Demon Lord." Tia shouted yes. Ed said that for that matter, who will do what after the victory? They asked after? Ed said, well, if there is something they would like to do or do. He thought that if he couldn't fix anything, then he needed to figure out why they should banish him. Tia thought about it and said that Alexis will become king. Ed laughed and put his hand on the hero. He asked, and then what? Will he attach wings to the royal castle? Alexis yelled, screw them. He said that if he was not mistaken, Gonzo, he wanted to return to the eastern lands for a while? Gonzo said yes, but don't worry, it can wait. Alexis said he's not worried. He laughed and said, come on. It's all written all over his face. Ed asked Tia what would she like to do? She thought about it and said that she would like to go on a trip around the world. The world is still huge. She wants to know and see so much. Maybe she'll find a place to make her home. And he will tell everyone about their exploits. A wonderful dream? Yes? Tia asked and showed 2 fingers, biting her tongue. The hero laughed and said that it was her style. Tia asked Ed what would he like. He replied that he would return home with souvenirs. His home village is small, but it is quiet and peaceful. Tia screamed, Ed's home village? She wants to go there too. Ed put his hand forward and said that if he had the opportunity. She made a pitiful face and called him nasty. Tia said that if he wanted, they could come with him. He just needs to say. She will not forgive if he suddenly disappears from this world. Gonzo came up to them and said, that's right, little one. Maybe in the future they will quarrel over something. But they are still comrades who fought shoulder to shoulder. He took Tia by the hand and lifted her up and said that this connection is forever indestructible. Tia repeated, indestructible. Alexis came up to them and said that he didn't know what he was thinking, but he asked how long would they pretend that they were drunk from plain water. But to be honest, it's too early to talk about the future, because they. Ed interrupted him and told him to defeat the Demon Lord at any cost. He asked, what's wrong with a happy future if they have the power to create it? Alexis said there was nothing wrong with that. And he is not going to break his promise. Ed said he thought he said something else a few minutes ago. Alexis asked what he was talking about. Ed extended his fist to the heroes and said, make a promise to defeat the Demon Lord and no matter what the cost. Alexis looked at him with fear. He closed his lips, confidently extended his fist towards his fist, and said that he understood him. Okay. They bumped fists. The hero continued that he would defeat the Lord at any cost. Ed thought that this was the first time he would part with them on such a note. But this time, I will see it through to the end. That's why I don't want him to have any regrets. He will try his best from now on. A group of heroes were getting ready for bed. Peace and quiet reigned. Some were already sleeping soundly, while others were just yawning. Ed continued to think that for the sake of faith in a bright future. Gonzo opened his eyes and stood up. He walked up to Ed and said that it was time for a changing of the guard. Now he also needs to rest. Ed asked how Tia and Alexis were doing? He asked again, huh? They sleep like the dead. And what? Ed said thoughtfully, yes. Gonzo. Could he ask him for a favor? Gonzo looked at him in surprise and asked, kid? Alexis sat behind them on the ground near the trees. He listened to them and looked at his armor. Ed continued to think that he did not want to regret anything, so I would dispel all fears about him. After all, this is his last task as an exile. A group of heroes rushed towards the battle. Tia, who was sitting on Gonzo's shoulder, suddenly screamed, there. She sees the end of the demon lands. Gonzo shouted back to her that it took them almost a month to get there. Alexis put his hand behind his back and with a confident movement began to take out his sword, saying that this is it. With this attack, I will clear the way for us. He used the skill Full Moon Sword. A wave of force from Alexis blew past ahead of them. There was a loud sound, everything scattered in different directions from the wave, and a group of heroes covered themselves from the light and dust of this attack. Tia looked tired. Someone laughed and said that's how they are. There were many demons and monsters standing in front of the group of heroes. The same battle awaited them. Ed thought that finally, he saw those from whom the squad of heroes fell in the future. He looked at them closely and studied them. One of the monsters was distinguished by its appearance. It had horns and a sharp tongue. He turned to the squad and said that he was waiting for them. Welcome. The monster laughed. The group of heroes looked sullenly towards the monsters. The horned monster, said the hero and his friends. They were really tired of waiting for them. Oh, great hero and his friends. The demon lord's army blocked their path. The horned monster pointed at them and mocked them with the words that only a hero or a madman could come here. Let the hero say how he is going to pass them in such a tired state. Ed took the initiative and confidently said, "Hey, doesn't it seem to him that he somehow decided to welcome them with so many guests, or is he worried about something?" He smiled and continued that the hero would gladly cut it with his sacred sword. If they want to get the hero's autograph, then let them stand in line. The horned monster asked, "Oh, even so?" Hee. It stood majestically in its place and continued that strange information had simply reached them, that in fact the leader of the group was not a hero, but a certain black-haired squire handyman. And he is even stronger than the hero. Ed frowned and looked at him. The eye exclaimed that it was him. It's him. Avenge his master. The horned monster looked at them and grinned. Ed slammed his fist into his palm and said in surprise that damn it, he forgot about it. Gonzo asked what kind of monster this is. Ed told him that it was something like a public address system. He put his finger forward, smiled and said, "Okay, let's get to the point. Doesn't he want to let the others go then, and he will stay with him?" The horned monster shouted angrily that he should not be a fool. The lesson he learned from them little people was that you shouldn't trust their weakness. You need to kill them here and immediately. Therefore, he gathered an army here. And they won't go any further. Alexis didn't understand him and asked him again, "What does it mean to pass? They just need to defeat him. And yet he gathered the entire army here? Is he so stupid that he didn't even bother to protect the Lord? Is it even sure it can defeat them without a plan?" The horned monster began to bare its teeth and shouted menacingly that it would kill them. "All troops, attack! Kill them!" All the monsters and demons rushed towards the squad of heroes. They screamed and ran. Alexis got into a fighting pose, prepared his sword to strike, and it started to glow. He said, "Okay, let's finish them quickly." Ed also stood up and took out his sword. He answered him that he understood. Tia took out her sword and asked, "Alexis, don't overdo it, okay? He still has to fight the demon lord." The heroes group stood in front of him. Gonzo shouted, "That's it. So they will take on the small ones." Gonzo took a stance and activated his gloves and let out a terrifying roar at the monsters. Gonzo pointed his hands into the crowd and launched a magical wave in their direction. It swept everyone off their feet. At this moment, Tia was sitting on her knees leaning on her sword and reciting a spell, the moon that gathers the earth and gives it shape, the four fangs of the 100-toothed spirit that pierce light and darkness, heed the call of linearity. A magical pillar formed from the ground. Tia said, "Glaive of the earth." Sharp spikes appeared from the ground and pierced all the monsters around. The monsters screamed in pain. Someone shouted that their goal was to wear down the hero. The horned monster pointed his finger towards the party of heroes and shouted for them to keep advancing. "Don't spare your lives. Anything for the demon lord." Someone called out to the horned monster, "Mr. Garagis." The monster continued to shout to Garagis that the enemy forces were too strong, they couldn't even hurt them. Elven magic also turned out to be stronger than they thought. There is no way they can be stopped or worn down. Mr. Garagis shouted with indignation, "Why? Why is their defense so strong? When did they become so strong?" He looked at Gonzo, who stood in the same position and was full of strength, and his army only lay under his feet. He continued to scream, and so did the elf. She cast spells without rest. How does she not run out of mana? The sounds of the approaching defeat of monsters reigned all around. Mr. Garagis said, "Okay, if so, go ahead, Jormungandr. Bury them." Everything around began to shake in earnest. The group of heroes looked around and tried to understand what was happening. Alexis noticed that the ground under his feet no longer supported him. Suddenly the ground beneath them collapsed and they fell down. Ed screamed, "Did the ground disappear from under his feet? Did they fall into a trap?" Gonzo also shouted, "What, are you trying to bury them with his comrades?" Someone shouted that stop falling. They need to rise up somehow. Some creature said that it had found it. Hero. Ed noticed where the sound was coming from. He turned around and screamed in panic that damn, there was a huge snake behind them. Tia screamed, "Hold on." She began to cast a spell, appear in the name of linearity, the hand of the earth. Will they be saved? The stone hand that Tia created almost reached the top. Suddenly she climbed out of the cliff and grabbed onto the ground. Ed screamed her name, "Tia." She replied, controlling the stone hand so that they would not worry, "Just a little more." A huge snake threw out a stone hand high above the ground and aimed to eat it. The snake swallowed the stone hand, but part of the hand grabbed the snake's throat. Someone laughed and shouted that it was a good try. But they still won't succeed. The huge snake said that it would simply swallow them whole. And Gonzo said he never thought he'd be able to fly, especially with his huge body. By the way, even though he is big, he is still weak. The huge snake asked what? A group of heroes got out and stood on a huge snake. Alexis asked, so this creature can also fly? Ed asked in response if they could help her down. Alexis smiled and said what a coincidence, they were thinking about the same thing. Ed swung his sword and said, well, let's turn our thoughts into reality then. With a heroic sound, he plunged his sword into the carcass of a huge snake, and it screamed in pain. The snake began to maneuver, it tried to throw them off, but they were able to control it. The group of heroes held on as strong as they could. Alexis shouted, hey! Not there! Take it to the left! In! And a little higher! Ed shouted, it's hard to control this thing, you know! Damn it! I'm about to fall! Tia! Cover it with wind magic! Tia understood everything immediately. They landed a huge snake on the ground, which destroyed the area and raised a lot of dust. Ed covered Tia with his hands, tried to clear his throat, and asked loudly, did it work? Tia covered herself and said that they were close to death, but she was glad that they were safe. Ed asked her, Tia, did she lose a lot of mana? Here, have a drink. He thanked her for saving him. He handed the bottle to her, and said that they still had a long journey ahead. She looked at this bottle with admiration and thanked him. Gonzo jumped out of the snake's mouth and screamed, but I was safe and full of strength. Tia was already drinking the potion from the flask at that moment. Ed threw the bottle to Gonzo and said, take it. It won't hurt for him to recover either. Alexis looked around and turned to Ed, not what they expected, but it looks like they got it. He looked at him in surprise. A large and tall staircase appeared in front of the group of heroes. Some of them said that they came where they wanted. Real demon lands? Tia looked back and said that only now they need to be even more careful. Gonzo said that those devils are not going anywhere. If they don't hurry up, they will be squeezed from both sides. Tia agreed and said that they could go ahead, but it would be better to deal with them. They chose a difficult path. Alexis interrupted everyone and asked everyone to listen to him. He's glad he fought alongside them. Thanks them from the bottom of my heart. Thanks them. That's what he wanted to say. The squad looked at the hero and did not understand anything. He continued to say that what awaits them next is only death. There is no guarantee that they will be able to leave here alive. Unlike him, the hero, each of them has the right to live the way he wants. Retreat is also a good option. I swear he won't blame any of them. The further choice is theirs. Follow him or leave. Ed smiled and thought that this is what you wanted to ask then, such is his determination and pride, Alexis. That's why he saved Tia then, his actions contradict his own words. Tia asked, hey, why is he even asking that? She showed a cross with her hands and continued that of course she would go with him. Gonzo gave the thumbs up and shouted what exactly? Does he just go with the hero like he's going for a walk? He came to save the world. Ed thought that this was the way he was, and that's why everyone would follow him. He laughed and said that it was better this way. The squad looked at him, they did not understand what he wanted to say. Ed thought that they were all strong without him and could easily cope with everything. He bowed his head and calmly, but sadly, said that I'm sorry, but he's leaving.